Chapter 381. Huashan perfected cultivators were high and mighty figures in the cultivation world of the human race. They were revered by all. Every Huashan perfected cultivator's status was similar to that of a demigod. And in the Immortal City, or in the world's most powerful Xianxia, the 6 Huashan perfected cultivators could be said to be the most powerful figures. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were directly in charge of the life and death of all living beings. Since the status of Huashan perfected cultivators was so high, they naturally would not pay attention to some insignificant matters. Moreover, these perfected cultivators all had a large group of people following them. Naturally, there would be a large group of people helping them. Therefore, this was the first time in many years that Lu Chen had heard that a Huashan perfected cultivator would actually pay attention to the problem of whether there were many dogs in the Immortal City. It was a bit like a legendary dragon suddenly paying attention to an insignificant ant in the dust at its feet. This Jianghu perfected cultivator is a bit interesting. Lu Chen said to Old Ma as they hurried along. Have you seen him? Old Ma shook his head and said, I haven't seen him. The 6 perfected cultivators in the Immortal Alliance are all high and mighty figures. Other than this one from our own family, I don't have the qualifications or the opportunity to see them. It's just a meeting. How can it be considered an opportunity? Lu Chen said disapprovingly. Then, he pondered for a moment and said, but if there really is such a ban, it will be a bit troublesome. It won't be easy for Atsu to follow me into the city. Atu, who was following beside him, seemed to understand a little, and its large dog head came over to take a look. Lu Chen smiled at it and rubbed its head, saying, It's all right, if worst comes to worst, you can just wait for me outside the city. And it's not impossible. Wait for me to think of a way. Maybe I can bring you into the city. Then, he glanced at Old Ma and said, According to what you said, there is not a single dog in such a large territory in the Immortal City? Old Ma immediately shook his head and said, Of course not. There were hundreds of millions of people in the Immortal City. Even if it was impossible for everyone to have a dog, there were still many dog lovers. After Tai Hu True Monarch's dog prohibition order was issued, many dogs were indeed hunted and killed. All kinds of dogs on the streets of Immortal City also disappeared for a while, but there are definitely still many dogs left in the city. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows slightly, looking a little curious. Smiling, he said, Seems like the Immortal City is indeed a place with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. There's actually someone who dares to ignore the ban of a soul formation perfected lord. And from what you said, it seems like there are quite a number of such people? Old Ma thought for a while and said, Not necessarily. After all, he is a perfected cultivator. Everyone has to be careful. But in the Immortal City, there are still quite a few people who still keep dogs. It's just that everyone is a little more restrained and no longer swagger their dogs on the streets like before. They keep them at home? Yes, they usually keep them at home and occasionally bring them out for a stroll. They just have to be careful. After all, the people who still keep dogs now have some status. Those guards who kill and ban dogs in the city mostly turn a blind eye when they see them. Lu Chen nodded and asked again, Then the dogs that were killed in the past? Old Ma sneered and said, Of course it's the dogs of those commoners. Oh, there were indeed quite a few wild dogs in the Immortal City, so they were all killed. In the past, there would often be incidents of mad dogs biting people in the Immortal City. You know, in that kind of place, it's very easy to have mixed blood wild dogs and the like. Every year, there are actually quite a number of people who are bitten to death by mad dogs. But after Tai Hu True Monarch's ban was issued, the situation became much better. Then it seems that this ban is not completely without its benefits. Lu Chen said with some surprise. Old Ma laughed and said, You can say that. But this matter, we small characters and commoners take it seriously. People like Lord True Monarch definitely don't care about it. Maybe he will just casually give an order and then be too lazy to care. I heard that the people who carry out this ban under Tai Hu True Monarch have done some unbearable things and caused a lot of public anger. What do you mean? Lu Chen looked a little curious. Old Ma laughed and said, what else can it be? It's nothing more than those tricks of bullying the weak and fearing the strong, and bullying the kind. These people don't dare to provoke the rich and influential families, but when it comes to bullying the commoners, they don't hesitate to come and catch the dogs. At the same time, there are also extortion and blackmail. I haven't been in the Immortal City these days, but I heard that because of this ban, there is a foul atmosphere and the people are boiling with anger. Lu Chen frowned and said, so bad? That Tai Hu True Monarch doesn't know about it? Old Ma shrugged and said, Lord True Monarch is a high and mighty person. Who knows how many things he has to do every day, he won't pay attention to such a small matter. Lu Chen's eyes flashed, and after a moment, he suddenly said, I don't know about the people under Tai Hu True Monarch, but the dead Baldy has a large number of people under him, especially Fuyunji, such a sinister and cunning hall. He definitely knows about it, right? Old Ma coughed and didn't say anything. Lu Chen snorted and revealed an as expected expression. Then, he shook his head and didn't say anything. Along the way, with this incident of dog ban mentioned by Old Ma unintentionally, Lu Chen asked Old Ma some things about Tai Hu True Monarch without batting an eyelid, as if it was incidentally. According to Old Ma, Tai Hu True Monarch was a highly respected big shot who was a little older than Tian Lan True Monarch. But for Lu Chen, this answer was meaningless, because first of all Huashan True Monarchs were highly respected. If they didn't admit this, they probably couldn't stay in Zhengxiameng or the Immortal City any longer. In addition, the dead Baldy Tian Lan was indeed a rare genius. Among the 6 true monarchs in Zhengxiameng, he was the youngest one. In other words, all the Huashan true monarchs were older than the dead Baldy. After being despised and questioned by Lu Chen, Old Ma had to search his memory again and told Lu Chen some things about Tai Hu True Monarch that he could think of in his daily life. In this way, it seemed that a more complete image of a Huashan True Monarch gradually became clear in front of Lu Chen. Needless to say, Tai Hu True Monarch was born in a famous cultivation sect, Tian Luo True Monarch. In addition, this true monarch had a serious and cautious temperament. For many years, he had always been fair, so he was in charge of the Hall of Heavenly Law, which was in charge of law and punishment in Zhengxiameng. He was impartial and had always been respected by the world. Behind this true monarch was a rich and powerful family, and he also had several proud disciples, all of whom were outstanding geniuses in Tian Luo sect. Under his command, the Hall of Heavenly Law had a very strong guard, which was said to be among the top 3 in the ranking of the various mountains in Zhengxiameng. In short, he was basically an incomparably strong and superior big shot. In addition, at the last moment, Old Ma said to Lu Chen calmly, well, I heard that this lord doesn't like our boss, Tian Lan True Monarch. They are like fire and water. Chapter 382. How so? These two are both spirit-severing true monarchs, and they're both in Zhengxiameng. How could their relationship be so bad? Lu Chen asked in surprise. Old Ma thought for a while, and said, I only know a little about the ins and outs of this matter. There are many things that only these two lords know. But as far as I know, Tai Hu True Monarch has been dissatisfied with Fuyunji for a long time. He often publicly said that our hall is a waste of money and is useless. Even Hall Master Xueying has been criticized by him several times. Lu Chen nodded, and revealed a trace of a smile on his face, and said, Xueying must be very depressed, right? Isn't that so? Old Ma laughed, and said, with Hall Master Xueying's identity, she can actually be considered a big shot in the Immortal City. Ordinary people don't dare to provoke her. But Tai Hu True Monarch is not an ordinary person. And he is probably one of the few humans in the Immortal City that Hall Master Xueying doesn't dare to provoke. Damn Baldy didn't stand up for his subordinates? Lu Chen asked. Old Ma hesitated for a while, and said, "This matter is actually not easy to handle." Tai Hu True Monarch only said a few words, and didn't really make a move or suppress them. Then, with his identity, even our true monarch can't say much. After all, in terms of seniority, Tai Hu True Monarch is a bit older. Speaking up to here, Old Ma sighed again, and said, "But then again, these few years in Fuyunji has not been very smooth. Many things have gone wrong, and people have seen them as a joke. In addition, the remnants of the Devil's sect are sinister and cunning. They are really hard to deal with. Those who don't know the inside story will often ridicule them." Lu Chen was silent for a while, and suddenly sneered, and said, "Ordinary people might be like this, but how can people who have reached the position of true monarch not know the inside story of this kind of thing? In my opinion, that Supreme Tai who most likely has other plans in his heart." Old Ma was stunned for a moment, then he nodded and said hesitantly, "Now that you mention it, it seems to make sense. When you reach the Immortal City and see Lord True Monarch, you might as well mention this to him." Lu Chen looked at him with a smile and shook his head. "Although this damned Baldy is sinister and cunning, with a belly full of evil tricks, in all these years, I've never seen anyone more powerful than him in both the righteous and evil Dao. So I think he probably knows about this kind of thing in his heart, he just doesn't want to say it." Old Ma laughed and nodded. "That makes sense. I didn't expect you to think so highly of Immortal even though you are usually dissatisfied with him." Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said grumpily, "Nonsense. Who in this world would look down on a divine transformation stage perfected cultivator? He's either a lunatic or a fool." Of course, Lu Chen and Old Ma were neither lunatics nor fools, so they quickly reached an agreement on this matter. At the same time, Lu Chen also casually asked Old Ma about the current situation in the Immortal City and Zhengxianmeng. Old Ma also told him everything honestly. It seemed that he did not hide anything from him. Although he was currently living in seclusion in the remote mountain village of Qingshudeng village, and no one knew how long he had stayed here before Lu Chen appeared, but from the conversation between Lu Chen and Old Ma, it was obvious that this fatty Old Ma seemed to be very familiar with Zhengxianmeng, including the various forces and factions in the Immortal City, as well as the various undercurrents surging under the water surface. It was obvious that he was a person who had immersed himself in the Immortal City and Zhengxianmeng for a long time. Because of this, Lu Chen actually had a preliminary understanding of the various forces in Zhengxianmeng and Immortal City just by listening to Old Ma's narration during the past few days of travel. But in the end, he still said to Old Ma very seriously, "Now I've memorized most of the things you said, so I have an idea of what to do. But right now, I have two more important things to ask you." Old Ma smiled and said, "Ask away, I'll tell you everything I know. Don't worry." Lu Chen stretched out a finger and said, "First, although the damn Baldy didn't sit on the throne of the Kunlun party's leader, his position in the Kunlun party is almost unparalleled. It can be said that he has control of this famous cultivation sect, right?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Of course. Now, from the top to the bottom of the Kunlun party, the only perfected cultivator in the soul formation stage can be said to be respected as a god." Lu Chen said faintly, "If that's the case, I find it strange. Why didn't the damn Baldy stay in the Kunlun mountain and be a local tyrant? Instead, he insisted on coming to Immortal City to be squeezed by people. Maybe there's something dangerous." Old Ma frowned, hesitated for a moment, and said, "In fact, it's not just what you said. After the master completely controlled the Kunlun party, he began to gradually summon the talents of the Kunlun party, including those Yuanyingzhenren with profound cultivation, to Immortal City. Of course, on the surface, he said that he had too many relatives and friends, but in the end, many of these people were still placed under his sect. Well, there are no personal disciples, everyone is a registered disciple." Speaking of this, his eyes looked at Lu Chen with deep meaning, but Lu Chen didn't seem to notice Old Ma's eyes for a while, or maybe he didn't want to be entangled in this kind of thing at all. At this moment, his attention was completely fixed on another thing, and he looked extraordinarily focused. Lu Chen looked around and suddenly said, "You mean, many of the young outstanding disciples of the Kunlun party have come to Immortal City?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Yes, and these people basically only know how to respect him. Although Zheng Xianmeng's intention is to incorporate these people into Fuyunji, now is probably not the time." Lu Chen snorted and said, "Using public resources for private purposes, this can be considered as using Zheng Xianmeng's money to cultivate their own children." Old Ma smiled and said, "Isn't that so?" But probably because of this, after Jianghu Zheng Xianmeng, who is in charge of Heavenly Law Hall, knew about this, he flew into a rage. His subordinates also suddenly became excited and began to stir up trouble. Once, they even took away a few people from Fuyunji, humiliated them by the river outside the city, and then ran away without leaving their names. Lu Chen glanced at him and felt that it was a little funny, and said, "Since they didn't leave their names, why do you think that it was done by Jianghu Zhenxiang subordinates?" Old Ma shrugged and said, "When you stay in Immortal City for a long time, you will probably be familiar with the rules here." Lu Chen didn't care, and just brushed over this issue and didn't talk about it anymore. Now he wanted to talk about another matter. "There is one more thing, Old Ma." "Say it." Old Ma replied. "Over the past few days, I've heard about the true Immortal Alliance along the way. They're really worshipping them as if they're gods. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the Immortal City who are itching to make a move. But these are none of my business. I just want to ask you, what did the damn Baldy tell you? Such a long journey, he wouldn't really let only the two of us finish it, right?" Old Ma was startled for a moment, then nodded and said, "You really know Zheng Xiangrily. In fact, after knowing our decision to return to Immortal City, Zheng Xiangrily thought about us, and specially arranged people to protect us." Who is it?" Lu Chen asked curiously. For some reason, Old Ma's expression looked a little subtle. After a while, he was heard coughing and said, "I heard that it is White Lotus." Chapter 383. Her again? Lu Chen was obviously startled. After a moment of silence, he said to Old Ma with a strange expression on his face, "If I remember correctly, White Lotus should be the last disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan in the past, right? That damn Baldy actually treats her differently. It really doesn't seem like his character." Old Ma shrugged and said, "Who knows? That little girl's identity has long been made public, at least in the Kunlun party, everyone knows about it. But don't think too much about it. Although Perfected Immortal has always kept White Lotus by his side for the past few years, he has never officially announced that he wants to accept her as a disciple." Lu Chen shook his head, his face calm, and said, "I won't think too much about it. I don't care who that damn Baldy wants to accept as a disciple. I just feel a little strange that he would actually keep Hakushin Jinkuan's disciple by his side." Old Ma smiled and said, "When I first heard about this, I actually felt a little strange in my heart, but Perfected Immortal's heart is as deep as the sea, and his plans are far-reaching. It's not a big deal that I can't see through it." Lu Chen didn't immediately respond to him, but just walked forward in silence for a while. After a while, he suddenly opened his mouth and said, "I have a guess about what that damn Baldy is thinking. Do you want to hear it?" Old Ma's body paused, and he turned to look at Lu Chen, only to see that Lu Chen had a gentle smile on his face. Old Ma looked at him for a while, and then said, "I don't want to hear it." After saying that, he continued to walk forward, leaving Lu Chen standing in the same place. Lu Chen's face finally revealed a trace of astonishment, but then he laughed and sped up his pace to catch up with Old Ma. Walking side by side with Old Ma, Lu Chen said with a smile, "Damn fatty, I haven't seen you for a few years, but you look a lot smarter." "Bah!" Old Ma spat at him, then sneered, "The superior is respected. Those who dare to pry into the private affairs of the venerable, especially those in our line of work, never live long. I'm still young. I don't want to die early." After that, Old Ma continued to walk forward without looking back. It seemed that he regarded Lu Chen as a snake or a scorpion. Lu Chen, on the other hand, didn't seem to mind and even laughed. He caught up with him in a few steps and said with a smile, "That damned Baldy still thinks highly of you. What are you afraid of?" "Bullshit." Old Ma looked very annoyed and said grumpily, "No matter what, I'm just a subordinate who runs errands for the Immortal. It's our duty to abide by the rules and not overstep them. On the contrary, you are the one who has a close relationship with the Immortal. You can say whatever you want, but I don't want to touch it at all." Lu Chen looked at him and said with emotion, "Nowadays, even you have become so smart. It's really hard to mix in the underworld of cultivation." Old Ma ignored him and just walked forward with his head down. Lu Chen stretched and said, "How about this? I'll say a few words to myself now. Just let it go in one ear and out the other. After all, we have a good relationship." Old Ma remained silent, as if he had completely covered up Lu Chen's voice. However, Lu Chen could still clearly see through some slight movements of Old Ma's body that this guy was secretly stretching his ears to listen carefully. Lu Chen didn't care. He coughed and said after a moment of silence, "Based on my understanding of that damned Baldy, if the infighting in the Kunlun party was really just a fight between him and Hakushin Jinkuan, then now he would never take care of Hakushin Jinkuan's disciples." Lu Chen nodded to the expressionless Old Ma next to him, and then said very clearly, "He is not the kind of person who is magnanimous. In the past, when someone angered him, it would have been fine if it was an ordinary mortal, because that damned Baldy couldn't afford to find trouble with mortals. But if it was a cultivator who angered him, the result was usually not good." Old Ma coughed and said, "Now, Lord Perfected Immortal has already cultivated his moral character, and his temper has become very good. Those things in the past will not happen again." Lu Chen sneered, obviously not believing what Old Ma said, and then said to himself, "Because of this damned Baldy actually showed great kindness this time. There's something wrong." "What's wrong?" Old Ma couldn't help but ask. "He must be buying people's hearts." Lu Chen said seriously, "After that damned Baldy defeated Hakushin Jinkuan and took control of the Kunlun party, there must be many people watching what he did, and they must be anxious. But as long as this news gets out, probably everyone will think that if this perfected immortal Tianlan can even take care of his senior brother's last disciple, isn't this very righteous?" Old Ma coughed, and then said seriously, "Lord Perfected Immortal is really righteous, but this matter actually has nothing to do with that little girl named White Lotus, right?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "In addition to buying people's hearts, that damned Baldy kept White Lotus by his side to cultivate, there is probably one more important reason." Old Ma couldn't help but be curious, and asked, "What is it?" "She is a five-pillar genius." Lu Chen smiled, but when the smile was reflected in Old Ma's eyes, it seemed to be a little cold at that moment, and in his ears, Lu Chen's voice continued to echo, "Such a genius is rarely seen in 1,000 years, and even if there is one, she may not be able to enter the Kunlun mountain. How could that damned Baldy give up such a chance?" He smiled, looking very happy and gratified, and said to Old Ma with a smile, "Don't you think so?" Old Ma was in a daze for a while, and suddenly turned around and strode forward, muttering at the same time, "What a mess, I'm confused." Lu Chen and Old Ma met White Lotus on the fourth day after they went out. On that day, the sky was a little gloomy, and it was almost dusk. Even Atsu, who was following them, looked a little sleepy. Lu Chen discussed with Old Ma to find a place to rest first, and then continue their journey the next morning. While they were chatting, Atsu, who was originally lying at Lu Chen's feet, suddenly quivered, and then its ears pricked up, it opened its eyes, and looked forward. Lu Chen and Old Ma seemed to feel that something was wrong at this moment, and then they saw the last ray of sunset in front of them. The pale golden light sprinkled on the ground, and the leaves and weeds on both sides of the road seemed to be plated with a layer of golden light, shining beautifully, and admirable. A girl in white appeared on the road in front of them, looking in Lu Chen's direction with a frosty expression. Lu Chen's eyes met hers, and for a moment, he was also filled with emotions. He thought that if it wasn't for the bad luck, this girl in front of him might have fallen into the barbarian wasteland in the south with him. However, it was a little boring to think about these things now, so Lu Chen smiled and waved at White Lotus. White Lotus looked at him, and then at old Ma, and finally slowly looked down, and saw the big black dog lying next to Lu Chen. A huge black dog, which looked more like a demon beast than a domestic black dog, was lying there, and looked like it was about to fall asleep. "Hey!" White Lotus suddenly shouted, "Stupid dog, how long has it been, and you already don't recognize me?" Atsu's body suddenly trembled, and then it slowly raised its head, looking at the girl in white in front of it. After a moment, Atsu suddenly let out a whine, and a trace of fear appeared on its face. Chapter 384. There was a hint of surprise in old Ma's eyes as he looked at White Lotus in front of him. He did not notice the abnormality of Atsu next to him. However, Lu Chen was different from him. He had been with this black dog almost every day for the past few years, so he noticed the abnormality of Atsu almost immediately. He could not help but frown. After Atsu's breakthrough a few years ago, Lu Chen rarely saw this kind of fear in him. Even when he ventured into the depths of the southern lands with Lu Chen in the future, Atsu was still carefree, roaming the world with ease. However, on this day, when Atsu saw White Lotus, it suddenly showed this kind of abnormal emotion, which surprised Lu Chen. Perhaps Atsu still remembered the encounter in Kunlun Mountain? A figure walked up from behind and stood in front of Atsu, blocking Atsu's sight. It was Lu Chen. He reached out his hand and touched Atsu's head. Atsu seemed to feel something and looked at him. The fear in its eyes quickly dissipated, and it became clear and calm again. Whether it was Lu Chen's hand or Atsu's fur, they were both warm. Lu Chen smiled and nodded to Atsu, then turned around and looked at White Lotus. After a few years, White Lotus was no longer the child she used to be. Today, she was still delicate and beautiful, and her temperament was still pure and cold. She still gave people the feeling of an ice fairy. But it was undeniable that this girl was approaching, or should it be said that she was about to enter the most beautiful, brilliant, and dazzling youth of her life. Her body had grown a lot taller, and she looked more and more slender. Her figure was gradually revealed, making people's eyes light up. It was as if this girl was born with a dazzling light that made people unable to ignore her, and subconsciously wanted to take a few more glances at her. Lu Chen nodded to her, showed a smile, and said, "Long time no see." White Lotus's gaze fell on him, and there was a trace of hidden and very complicated expression in the depths of her eyes. When she was about to speak, suddenly all three people present heard a roar from behind Lu Chen. It was Atsu who poked its head out from behind Lu Chen. But this time, the instinctive fear that Atsu showed when it saw White Lotus had completely disappeared. Instead, this big black dog seemed to be very annoyed. It bared its teeth and growled at White Lotus, and even showed its fangs. It looked very angry, as if it couldn't wait to pounce on this beautiful girl to vent its anger. White Lotus probably didn't expect Atsu's expression and attitude to change so suddenly. She was stunned and said to Lu Chen, "What's wrong with you, stupid dog?" Lu Chen reached out and stroked Atsu's head. After thinking for a while, he said, probably angry out of shame, "White Lotus, holy beasts were powerful monsters." After advancing, they almost had no natural enemies, and there were not many enemies in the world that they were afraid of. Therefore, the sudden fear just now made Atsu very angry and annoyed. It felt that there was no need for it to be afraid of White Lotus at all. It felt that it had embarrassed itself. Therefore, for the rest of the journey, this big black dog no longer had a good attitude towards the beautiful girl, White Lotus. However, humans were heartless. None of the three people present would run to comfort this suddenly angry black dog. At most, Lu Chen gently stroked its head a few times. At the same time, his attention was still on White Lotus. "Why are you here?" Lu Chen asked White Lotus. White Lotus shrugged and said, "I was ordered to come here." As she said that, she turned to face old Ma and took out a sealed envelope from her arms. She asked Old Ma, "Are you Ma Xiaoyun?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Yes." As he said that, he took out a piece of jade from his arms and handed it to White Lotus. White Lotus took it and looked at it carefully. Then, she nodded and handed it to Old Ma along with the envelope in her hand. Old Ma took the jade and put it away first. Then, he directly opened the envelope and read the letter inside carefully. Then, he nodded and said, "That's right. But in the letter, Lord Perfected Immortal ordered me to go with Lu Chen to the Immortal City. I will go with you." White Lotus grunted and did not seem to care. Her clear and lively eyes looked at Lu Chen and said, "Let's go." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Okay, let's go. How have you been these few years?" Lu Chen asked White Lotus. White Lotus said, "It's not bad. My biggest backer, Master, died, and in the end, I found an even more powerful Uncle Master. I don't know how many people inside and outside the sect are envious of me." As she said that, she smiled at Lu Chen and said, "What about you?" "I'm quite unlucky." Lu Chen said honestly, "After you left, Atsu and I also went south to escape into the depths of the land of chaos. Our days were miserable and we only came back recently." White Lotus looked like she didn't believe it. She pointed at Atu and said, "You must be talking nonsense. This stupid dog is 10 times fatter than before. How can it look like it's living a miserable life? This is obviously the appearance of a well-fed dog." Roar. Atsu let out a low growl and extended its fangs. It looked like it was trying to bite off White Lotus's white and delicate finger. White Lotus giggled as she retracted her finger. She didn't seem angry at all. She said to Lu Chen, "This dog's temper has grown. I don't remember it being this angry when it was with you." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Atsu is not like this usually. It is probably in a bad mood today." White Lotus thought about it and nodded without saying anything. Lu Chen changed the topic and at the same time, he asked about the doubts in his heart. He said, "What about you, what's the situation now? It seems like you are doing very well in the Kunlun party. Even that true Lord Tianlon treats you differently." White Lotus curled her lips and said, "It's just so. There is nothing to boast about." Lu Chen asked, "Shouldn't you be on the Kunlun mountain in the West Land? Why did you come to the Immortal City and were sent to pick me up?" White Lotus said, "My martial uncle Tianlon insisted that I follow him, and then he suddenly told me to come to pick you up not long ago." Speaking of this, White Lotus suddenly smiled and said, "But I really did not expect that the person who can make a perfected cultivator of Huashan realm miss you and make me come to pick you up in person is actually you." Lu Chen said with a smile, "That's really hard for you." White Lotus looked into his eyes, but there was no smile in her eyes. After staring at Lu Chen for a long time, she suddenly said, "Who are you?" Lu Chen said, "I'm a former handyman disciple of the Kunlun party. You can't have forgotten this, can you?" White Lotus snorted and said, "What kind of handyman disciple can make a perfected cultivator of Huashan realm remember him and send someone to pick him up? There must be an important reason for him to think so highly of someone." Lu Chen smiled and said nothing. He just walked forward with Atsu. After a while, suddenly, White Lotus's voice sounded a little cold. She said, "Lu Chen, were you a spy that perfected cultivator Tianlon personally placed in the Kunlun party to inquire about information in the Kunlun mountain and do a lot of evil things? For example, my master and my eldest brother." Lu Chen's expression did not change. He still looked gentle and polite. He smiled at White Lotus and said, "No, I don't know the person you are talking about, so these things have nothing to do with me." "Really?" White Lotus looked a little suspicious. "Really?" Lu Chen said with a smile and a nod. He looked very relaxed and there was no trace of lying. Chapter 385. What do you think of White Lotus as a person? This was the first question Lu Chen asked Old Ma when they chatted privately that night after they rested for the night. Because of safety concerns, they did not enter the cities and towns along the way, but directly slept in the wild. Fortunately, sleeping in the wild was not difficult for cultivators like them. At night, because of the difference between men and women, and because White Lotus was also a neat freak, or because she was not used to being too close to others, she hid far away and slept. Old Ma glanced at White Lotus in the distance. After making sure that she could not eavesdrop on his conversation with Lu Chen, he lowered his voice and said, "It's okay. At least on the surface, she is good to us. As for more, this is the first day we met, so we can't see it." Lu Chen nodded slowly. After a moment, he said, "Didn't she say that the damn Baldy always kept her by his side? Why did he let her come out alone to pick us up this time?" Old Ma shrugged and moved his fat body lying on the ground to make himself more comfortable. At the same time, he said, "No one knows. I think that besides Lord Immortal and White Lotus herself, there is probably no third person who can completely understand the relationship between them. However, since you ask this, I think that this time White Lotus came to pick us up, at least two things are clear." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and moved closer to Old Ma. He asked with interest, "Oh. What two things? Tell me." Old Ma said lightly, "First, Lord Immortal believes in her. Or it can be said that he has great confidence that White Lotus will not betray him, so he can let her come out alone to pick us up. Second, Lord Immortal values you very much, but he only secretly sent White Lotus for such an important matter. This means that this girl's cultivation is absolutely not what it used to be, and her strength must be abnormally strong. That is why Lord Immortal trusts her so much." Lu Chen was deep in thought. Old Ma looked at him and said with some bad intentions, "What, are you afraid? In the past, Lord Immortal valued you so much, but you did not pay attention to him. Now that such a genius has suddenly appeared out of nowhere, do you know to be nervous?" Lu Chen also laughed, shook his head, and looked at White Lotus in the distance. He saw that the girl was sleeping with her clothes on, and seemed to have fallen asleep. He was silent for a moment, and said, "Damn Baldy, this person, is extremely intelligent, far-sighted, and sophisticated. He is close to a demigod, but not like a human, so it is very difficult to use ordinary people's point of view to guess him. In my opinion, at least in the current world, there is no one that he deeply trusts. This White Lotus is also the same. She is not qualified." Old Ma did not seem to agree with Lu Chen's words. He sneered and said, "Look at what you said as if it is true. Then tell me, in the end, how can one be considered as Lord Immortal's considerate person?" Lu Chen said indifferently, "It's very simple. That damnable Baldy officially takes someone as a disciple and passes down the heaven character Daoist title passed down from generation to generation to that person. That person is someone that he truly regards highly and fosters with all his heart." Tian Daoist name? Old Ma seemed to be stunned for a moment. After a while, he said, "If it is to accept a disciple, White Lotus should be very promising. After all, her talent is too good. She is a rare five-pillar genius. Even Hakushin Jinkun made an exception and accepted her as his last disciple." Lu Chen sneered and said, "Damn Baldy is not his dead senior brother, let alone him. In short, remember what I said, in the eyes of Damn Baldy, everyone is probably the same as an ant. The most important thing is whether they are useful or not. As for saying that there is hope with him as a five-pillar genius, I don't know if White Lotus believes in this, but that is a lie." As he said this, Lu Chen looked up at the dark sky and slowly said, "What is 5 pillars? It is necessary to use them." The journey was very smooth and there were no accidents. After a few days, they safely arrived at the Yingxing River outside the Immortal City. From afar, they could already see the huge city in the vast and fertile Four Rivers plain in the distance. The Immortal City was now the well-deserved #1 city in the vast land of the Divine Land. Especially after Zhengxianmeng settled here 1,000 years ago and put in effort to manage it, until today, the prosperity of the Immortal City increased day by day. It attracted countless talents from aristocratic families and became the center of the land of the vast land. Unlike most of the cities in the vast land of the Divine Land, the Immortal City here, although there was the word city, there were no city walls. Countless buildings and palaces were built on this fertile land, forming a vast city that could not be seen at a glance. Here, people did not need the protection of the city walls, because the Immortal City itself was the most powerful force in the world. The Immortal City was backed by a mountain on one side and water on three sides. The four most famous rivers in the Four Rivers Plain flowed through this huge city. In the early ancient times, it was said that there was an ancient relic here. Today, in the Immortal City, some remnants of the relic could occasionally be seen in some corners. Among them, the most eye-catching were of course in the east, south, west, and north directions. There was a magnificent giant statue carved with the legendary azure dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise. These four statues of the holy beasts were all standing with their backs facing the distance. Because of the long years, there were many wear and tear, but the boundless aura still remained. Over the years, it gradually became a famous scenery in the city. When outsiders came to the Immortal City to play, most of them would come down here to admire it. But other than that, the legends about the relic had been passed down for many years. There were all kinds of sayings. For example, there were ancient demons under the Immortal City, or treasures of heaven and earth in the depths of the relic, and so on. There were many kinds. However, it was generally accepted that the ruins were extremely dangerous and had caused the deaths of many people. For the sake of safety, several deity transformation stage perfected lords of the previous generation of the true Immortal Alliance cast a spell together to seal all the entrances to the ancient ruins. Since then, there were no more demons or ghosts in the Immortal City. Xianxia did his best to manage this place, and also made the Immortal City develop with each passing day. Many years later, the Immortal City was divided into the Upper City and the Lower City. The so-called Upper City specifically referred to the Azure Dragon district where the Azure Dragon statue was located. This area was located halfway up the Sky Dragon Mountain, and the terrain was at least 100 meters higher than the other districts. It was different from the other districts and had been directly expropriated by Xianxia long ago. Now, almost all the high-level people in Xianxia lived here. In addition, the other three districts, namely White Tiger, Vermilion Bird, and Black Tortoise, were all on flat ground. They were inferior to the Azure Dragon district in terms of majesty, but far more prosperous and lively. For many years, hundreds of millions of creatures lived in this big city named Immortal, and spent every day full of hope and surprises. Before we enter the city, I have something to say to you. On the bank of Yingxing River, White Lotus pulled Lu Chen and said to him. Old Ma, who was beside her, also stopped. Lu Chen said, "What is it?" "It's not convenient to bring this dog in," White Lotus pointed at Atsu very calmly. "Recently, someone in the city is killing dogs." "Well." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Old Ma told me about this before, but I don't think it's a big problem. After all, the damn Baldy's identity and status are extraordinary. It's not a big deal to protect a dog." "Woof." Atsu barked next to him, seeming to be a little happy. White Lotus shook her head and said, "It's not a good idea. It always causes trouble for Marshal Uncle Tianlan. You can leave it outside the city. Anyway, when we were in Kunlun Mountain, Atsu also ran around all day. It shouldn't get lost." Lu Chen's face changed slightly, and then he shook his head and said, "No." White Lotus was stunned and said in surprise, "What?" Chapter 386. Lu Chen looked at the Immortal City from afar, looking at the almost endless bustling scene of Mount Tianlong. Even though he was far away now, he seemed to be able to feel the hustle and bustle there. There are so many people here. It's hard to count the number of dogs or stray dogs without owners. I'm afraid it will be very difficult for the people under you to give the order to kill dogs, right? White Lotus shrugged and looked indifferent. She said, who cares? Anyway, I don't raise dogs. Besides, he is a perfected cultivator in the Huashan realm. He has high cultivation, high status, and power. He can do whatever he wants. Why should he care about what your people do? Well, what you said is very reasonable. Lu Chen smiled, then turned back to old Ma and said, since it's not good to take Atsu into the city, I won't go in. Go back and tell the damn Baldy to come out to see me, okay? Ah. Old Ma was a little stunned for a moment and didn't know what to say. White Lotus, who was next to him, was also shocked. After a while, she frowned and said, what nonsense are you talking about? Martial Uncle Tianlan is a person of high status. It's already a great honor for him to see you. How can he condescend to come out of the city to see you? Lu Chen ignored her. He just looked at Old Ma and said, Old Ma, you know what's going on. Does he want to see me, or do I want to see him? Old Ma gave a wry smile and said, well, it's him who wants to see you. White Lotus looked unhappy and said, even if Martial Uncle Tianlan wants to see you, isn't it a matter of course for you to pay a visit to him given his status? Lu Chen smiled and reached out to touch Atsu, who was standing next to him. He said, this time I don't want to follow this matter of course. Go back and tell the damn Baldy that I'll wait here tonight. If I don't come tonight, I'll leave tomorrow. How dare you? Before Old Ma could answer, White Lotus had already shouted at him. But then the beautiful girl suddenly rolled her eyes and the original anger suddenly disappeared. She looked at Lu Chen with some suspicion and said, who are you? Why are you so fearless in the face of a perfected cultivator in the Huashan realm? Aren't you afraid that the perfected cultivator will be furious and turn you into powder in an instant? Lu Chen nodded and said, yes, I'm very scared. After saying that, he turned around and walked towards a small forest not far away. Black Dog Atu was about to follow when it suddenly turned around and glared fiercely at Old Ma and White Lotus. It let out a low growl and bared its fangs as it shook its head threateningly. Then, it swung its tail and trotted after Lu Chen. White Lotus was furious and was about to scold him, but she suddenly heard Old Ma cry out, hey! Atsu, why are you being so fierce to me? It's not like I'm the one who's unhappy with you. White Lotus's words were about to come out of her mouth, but she was choked back by this guy's words. She turned around and glared at Old Ma, saying, how can you say that? This person is disrespectful to the perfected cultivator. Is it wrong for us to scold him? That's right. Old Ma immediately replied seriously, then turned around and walked toward the Immortal City. At the same time, he said, let's go back and pay our respects to the perfected cultivator and ask him to make a decision. It would be best if he could kill this guy in his anger and vent my anger. White Lotus followed him and looked at Old Ma suspiciously. She said, really? But you seem to be very familiar with this Lu Chen? Old Ma sneered and shook his head repeatedly. He said, Miss, you've misunderstood me. This guy has been an eyesore to me for more than 10 years. If I'm lucky enough to meet the perfected cultivator later, you'll see what I say to him. Oh, White Lotus couldn't figure out the relationship between the two men for a while, so she stopped talking and followed Old Ma to the Immortal City. She occasionally looked back. Lu Chen, who was a little mysterious in her heart, seemed to have become more and more vague now. He was like a vague and indistinguishable shadow in the night. Zhengxianmeng was the most powerful cultivation organization among the human clan in the vast land of the Divine Land. In terms of strength alone, it had long surpassed any single cultivation sect in the past. It could even be said that in the history of the human clan, there had never been something like Zhengxianmeng. But its strength, at least for now, was an unquestionable fact. Zhengxianmeng controlled the Immortal City, which was second to none in the world. The 6 perfected cultivators and the Immortal allies were the supreme leaders of this powerful organization, Zhengxianmeng, so they naturally occupied the best things in this city. The Azure Dragon district on the Sky Dragon Mountain was undoubtedly the best place in the immortal city of the 4 major districts marked by the statues of the 4 sacred beasts in the mysterious ruins left behind in the ancient times. The Azure Dragon district on the Sky Dragon Mountain was undoubtedly the best place in the immortal city of the 4 districts marked by the statues of the 4 sacred beasts in the mysterious ruins left behind in the ancient times. The headquarters of Xianxia was located here. The entire Azure Dragon district was the territory of Xianxia, and the 6 perfected cultivators had also taken the best pieces of land here as their residences. Perfected Tianlan once returned to his own sect, the Kunlun party, a few years ago. Many things happened on the way home, and there were many different opinions, but the final result was still in front of everyone. Whether they accepted it or not, it was the same. After that, perfected Tianlan stayed on the Kunlun mountain for more than a year. Although there were many rumors in the outside world that he wanted to settle the hearts of the people in the Kunlun party and eliminate the dissidents, he did not neglect the affairs of Xianxia, and there were no problems with remote control. After this period of time, perfected Tianlan once again set out on his journey to the immortal city. However, this time, under the surface of calmness, there were many undercurrents surging in Xianxia. This was because from that time on, many disciples of the Kunlun party joined Xianxia under various names and began to work for perfected Tianlan. The Kunlun party was one of the 5 famous sects in the world, and there were many outstanding talents in the sect. Therefore, gradually, the strength of perfected Tianlan's sect suddenly increased, and its momentum also became more and more prosperous. Old Ma and White Lotus met perfected Tianlan at noon that day. The super fatty, who was much fatter than Old Ma and of course much more burly, sat in his cave residence, passing shadow, and listened to what they had to say about Lu Chen. Perfected Tianlan's expression was like an ancient well, without any changes. When he turned to look down, he saw 2 people standing there. White Lotus frowned slightly, and there seemed to be a little anger on her face, while Old Ma looked down, like an old monk in meditation, as if nothing had anything to do with him. Perfected Tianlan shook his head, turned to White Lotus, and smiled. He said gently, "You've worked hard on this journey, go and rest. I'll deal with the rest, so you don't have to worry about it." White Lotus took a step forward and said, "Martial uncle, I think this person named Lu Chen is very strange. What's his background? How dare he be so arrogant and disrespectful to you?" Perfected Tianlan snorted and said, "This guy is rebellious and bold, so I must punish him severely." "Alright, you can go now." White Lotus wanted to say something but stopped on second thought, and there seemed to be a trace of confusion in her eyes. But in the end, she bowed and left the cave residence. At this time, there were only perfected Tianlan and Old Ma left in the cave residence. They looked at each other, and perfected Tianlan suddenly said, "What did that brat say?" Old Ma coughed and said, "Lu Chen asked me to send his regards to you, and he said that it's not that he doesn't want to go up the mountain, but, **T. Perfected Tianlan suddenly interrupted Old Ma impatiently and said, "That brat is used to being arrogant and detestable. He even dares to scold me in front of me, so how could he be so polite behind my back? Tell me the truth, what he said." Old Ma gave a hollow laugh and secretly looked at perfected Tianlan's expression. Not daring to hide it anymore, he could only say, "Well, Your Excellency, Lu Chen is still young." Before he finished his words, he saw perfected Tianlan's expression change again. Old Ma's heart skipped a beat, and he did not dare to argue anymore. He hurriedly said, "Go back and tell the damn baldy that I'll wait here for a night, and if I don't come tonight, I'll leave tomorrow." After saying that, Old Ma only felt a chill on his back. He could not help but subconsciously look at perfected Tianlan's shiny skull in front of him, and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. There was silence in the cave residence. Old Ma did not dare to look at perfected Tianlan's expression, and he even subconsciously held his breath. After a while, perfected Tianlan suddenly snorted and said, "It does sound like what that brat said." He's simply reckless, audacious, and rebellious." After saying those words in a serious tone that made old Ma's expression change, perfected Tianlan stood up and walked out of the cave residence. At the same time, he calmed down and said to old Ma, "Let's go and see that good-for-nothing guy." Old Ma said, Chapter 387. The small forest where Lu Chen and Atsu stayed was actually some distance away from the Immortal City, and it was also far away from the busy official roads. It was a very secluded place. When night fell, the huge city in the distance was brightly lit, while the forest here was dark and gloomy, as if they were two different worlds. Lu Chen sat quietly in the forest, his figure almost integrated with the surrounding darkness, looking like a vague shadow in the night, indistinct and difficult to distinguish. Atsu lay quietly beside him, a pair of dark green eyes shimmering in the darkness. Occasionally, it would look up at the sky, as if there was something it was interested in the boundless sky. The night was quiet, and there was no other sound except the sound of the night wind blowing through the treetops. But the city in the distance was too big and too prosperous. Even at such a distance, Lu Chen could still feel the invisible aura emitted from that place. That was the place that all the cultivators in the world yearned for. At this time, suddenly footsteps came from outside the forest, and then, a fat and burly figure appeared in their sight. The person who came was Supreme Tianlan. However, with Supreme Tianlan's cultivation realm, if he really wanted to hide from their eyes and ears, he would naturally have countless means and divine sense to get close without being noticed. But this damn baldy didn't seem to want to do so, and he walked directly over. Perhaps he even increased his pace to remind Lu Chen of the fact that he had come here. Lu Chen stood up and looked behind Supreme Tianlan, who was slowly walking over, but found that there was no one behind Supreme Tianlan. He was startled and slightly frowned. Tianlan walked to Lu Chen, his face calm, and his eyes deep, but in the end, a trace of complex light flashed across. After a moment, he smiled and said, "Long time no see." Lu Chen sighed, and his mood was a little complicated. The person in front of him had always been entangled with his fate in the first half of his life. He was indebted to him, but it seemed that he had betrayed his former friendship. He fled to the chaotic land, and finally fell into the southern wilderness. In fact, it was not a short time, but not too long either. From the beginning to the end, it was only a few years. But at this moment, under the night sky, beside the bustling city, when he saw this person again, Lu Chen still felt a sense of vicissitudes in his heart. "Long time, no see." Lu Chen also nodded. Tianlan looked at Lu Chen up and down, then glanced at Atu beside him, the black dog that was unusually large and looked like a giant wolf demonic beast 100 times larger than an ordinary dog. Tianlan's gaze suddenly paused for a moment, as if he was slightly surprised. He looked at it a few more times, but then he turned away and looked at Lu Chen again. "Where's old Ma?" Chen asked. "Oh, he's waiting outside the woods," Tianlan said. "I think it's more casual for us to talk this time, just the two of us, so don't let him follow us in." Speaking of this, Tianlan smiled and said, "In the end, little Ma is just a messenger between the two of us. In the end, we still have to say what we want to say, don't we? Or, could it be that you've been with him for so long that you actually trust him more than me?" Lu Chen's heart suddenly shrank, but his expression did not change. Without a moment of hesitation or pause, he shook his head and said, "Of course not." Tianlan chuckled and casually waved his wide robe sleeve. A gust of wind swept past, immediately blowing away the fallen leaves and dust in the woods, revealing a cleaner space. Then, this perfected lord of the divine transformation realm, who stood at the peak of the human cultivation world, actually did not take it to heart. He casually sat down in front of Lu Chen and at the same time called out to Lu Chen, Come, sit down and talk. It's so tiring to stand. This damn bald fatty would not feel tired even if he stood for a year." Lu Chen secretly criticized in his heart. Then, he still sat down and said, I heard from old Ma that it was you who wanted to see me? Yes. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, that's right. I haven't heard from you for several years. I only know that you escaped into the depths of the land of chaos and finally fell into the Longchuan River. So when I heard that you suddenly came back, of course I wanted to see you. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. Then, he looked up at Tianlan and said, all these years, you always thought that I was dead, right? Tianlan shook his head and said, no, I always believed that you were still alive. Lu Chen smiled and said, you actually have so much confidence in me. It's hard for an ordinary person to come back alive after falling into the river. Tianlan said lightly, you're someone that I personally taught. How can you be an ordinary person? Lu Chen was stunned and did not say anything. Tianlan continued, moreover, if I didn't believe that you were still alive, do you think I would allow He to live well just because I forced you to die? Lu Chen was slightly surprised and said, He? Perfected Lord Tianlan said, hunting you down is a great achievement. You can't possibly think that he would hide it from you, right? He told me everything from the beginning to the end. He even wanted to take me as his master and inherit my Taoism. Lu Chen's expression became somewhat complicated. At that moment, he did not seem to know what to say. Finally, he smiled bitterly and said, then what did you do with him in the end? Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly, I told him that he did a good job but it was still not enough for him to inherit my Taoism. I told him to cultivate more diligently. At the same time, I also transferred him from Kunlun Mountain to Zhengxianmeng to work for me. Now, he can be considered as one of my generals. Lu Chen sighed and said, good move. Perfected Lord Tianlan snorted and said, what move? It sounds like you're a little disdainful about it. Let's not talk about anything else. He didn't have any complaints at all and treated me like a talent scout. In order to strive for the top, his diligence and vigor are much stronger than yours. Lu Chen shook his head and said, I know, I also had that vigor before. But it was almost worn away when I was in the devil cult more than 10 years ago. A trace of anger suddenly flashed across Perfected Lord Tianlan's face. He stared at Lu Chen and the darkness around his fat body seemed to suddenly surge, like a demon beast suddenly roaring in the dark void. But very soon, Tianlan seemed to think of something again. His gaze on Lu Chen gradually softened. After a while, he sighed softly. Do you still blame me? Tianlan asked Lu Chen. No. Lu Chen shook his head and said, in the first few years, when I was burned to death by the black fire, I was indeed a little dissatisfied with you. But later, I gradually got over it. If you hadn't saved me back then, I wouldn't be where I am now. So, just take it as me repaying your kindness. Tianlan stared at him and said, you've really gotten over it? If there's anything in your heart that you're unhappy about, you might as well tell me. Lu Chen said, I've gotten over it. Anyway, those things are in the past. But... He paused and looked up at Tianlan, saying, this time, I do have a few things to ask you. Go ahead. Lu Chen paused and said, Su Qingjun and how is the Su family in Kunwa City now? Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him indifferently. After a while, he suddenly smiled. His smile was gentle but there was a hint of coldness in his eyes. Chapter 388. There was a moment of silence in the forest. Lu Chen raised his head slightly and looked at Tianlan. After a while, Tianlan said, didn't you ask little Ma about this before you came? Lu Chen said, I did, but old Ma didn't tell me much. He only said a few words and didn't want to say more. I think he was afraid that I would find out something and get angry. Maybe he wouldn't come to Immortal City and would run to Kunlun Mountain out of anger. Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned for a while, then he laughed and said, it's funny, but thinking about little Ma, it might really be possible. Lu Chen smiled and said, That's why I thought I'd come and ask you myself. Tianlan nodded and said, Su Qingjun is a good girl. Back then, that incident caused a storm in the city. There were people in the Su family and Kunlun sect who blamed and criticized her. She didn't defend herself and just took it. In the past few years, she only focused on cultivation and made great progress. If there are no accidents, it shouldn't be a problem for her to easily reach the Yuanying realm. Lu Chen was silent for a while and then said, It seems that she is not far from the truth to be able to get such a comment from you, a perfected lord of soul formation. Tianlan smiled and didn't say anything. His expression was calm as if what he said just now was a matter of course and had unshakable confidence. From what you said just now, the Su family seems to have a big reaction? Lu Chen asked again. Of course. Tianlan snorted and said, Back then, you went crazy and directly rushed into their mansion and killed Sumo in front of so many people. How do you think the Su family will react? Lu Chen said expressionlessly, I didn't kill wrongly and I don't regret it. Perfected Lord Tianlan waved his hand casually and said after a while, Yes, you're right. The Su family was so angry that they wanted to get to the bottom of this. After you escaped, the Su family was not willing to let you go. They went back to the faction to investigate you. Not only did they want to investigate your background, but they also wanted to find out how you entered the Kunlun party. They wanted to get to the bottom of it. They probably wanted to find your relatives and family by following the vines. Hearing this, Lu Chen's expression became strange. Even though he never liked the Su family, the only exception was probably Su Qingjun. However, upon hearing Perfected Lord Tianlan's words, Lu Chen still had an indescribable sense of absurdity. How did he join the Kunlun party? It was arranged by Perfected Lord Tianlan. What background does he have? Does he have a backer? Of course, the most powerful deity in the Kunlun sect was his backer. In the eyes of those who knew the inside story, the Su family's aggressive investigation was really a bit suicidal. Then how did you stop them from investigating? Lu Chen asked, was it troublesome? Tianlan snorted and said, Of course it was troublesome. You're the only one who knows how to make trouble. But it's just like that. I just made some arrangements so that they couldn't investigate further. Then what did you do to the Su family? Lu Chen looked at Tianlan with an inquiring look in his eyes. Tianlan said, I didn't do anything to them. I've been reorganizing the faction these years and didn't want to get involved. But Old Ma told me about the grievances you suffered in the Su family. I just wanted to wait for you to come back and see what you think. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, Is it important what I think? How you deal with the Su family depends on me. Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly, Well, it's up to you. No matter what, you're mine. Since you suffered in their hands, it's only right for me to take revenge. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched and he lowered his head slightly. After a moment, he said calmly, Forget it. The only one in the Su family who really hated me was Sumo, and he was killed by me. The others didn't have much to do with me, but Su Qingjun had a good relationship with me in that year. Let's stop this matter. Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes flickered and he said, Let's stop here. Lu Chen nodded and said, Yes, let's stop here. Don't get others involved. Okay. You said you had a few things to ask me. What about the other things? Tianlan asked. Lu Chen didn't know why, but when he looked at this fat and burly man, his original mood suddenly became a little bleak. He couldn't lift his spirits and felt more helpless. He was silent for a long time and then said with a wry smile, Forget it. I suddenly don't want to talk about other things. Perfected Lord Tianlan glanced at him and didn't get angry at Lu Chen's words. It seemed that this high-ranking perfected Lord of Huashan realm did have a whole new level of respect for the young man in front of him. He even seemed to know Lu Chen very well and was particularly tolerant of Lu Chen. He even said a few more words to Lu Chen, By the way, I also know about Xian. Lu Chen's body trembled slightly and he looked up. Tianlan said, the girl's body was taken back by her family and given a proper burial. I also asked the Kunlun sect to put in some effort to arrange a grand funeral for her. Let's just take it as us making it up to her a little. Lu Chen took a deep breath and then slowly stood up and said, when Xian was alive, she didn't seem to like this kind of thing very much. But I know her intention, and I think Xian's parents can also feel it. I thank you on behalf of that unfortunate girl. After saying that, he straightened his expression and solemnly bowed to Perfected Lord Tianlan and then said, if Xian knows in the underworld, she will definitely want me to thank you on her behalf. Perfected Lord Tianlan calmly accepted the bow. When Lu Chen straightened up again, he said, whether you still want to ask or not, since I'm here tonight, I naturally want to have a good talk with you. If you've said everything you want to know and know everything you want to know, then it's my turn to say it now, right? Lu Chen nodded and said, go ahead. Perfected Lord Tianlan said, come back and help me. Lu Chen paused for a moment and then said with a wry smile, with your power and strength, what kind of talent can't you find? Why do you insist on me coming back? Perfected Lord Tianlan said lightly, there are many people who want to help me, but I can't think of anyone else who is worthy of my complete trust and can be entrusted with such important matters by me. Lu Chen coughed and said, I've been listening to this kind of flattery for 10 years. I've long known that it's just a big empty pie in the sky. Don't lie to me. Perfected Lord Tianlan said with a smile, I'm not lying to you. I'm telling the truth. Lu Chen shook his head and said, I heard from Old Ma that you've recently transferred many young experts from the Kunlun party over, and half of them have joined Fuyunji. These people are of the same lineage as you, so you can trust them in everything they do. Tianlan said, those people are passable, but I still can't trust them completely. And this time, there's one thing I still only trust in you. Lu Chen fell silent. After a while, a bitter expression appeared on his face and he said, the devil cult again? Yes, Tianlan said, it's the devil cult again. It has to be you. Bullsh *T. Lu Chen scolded, last time in Kunlun Mountain, you also said the same thing to me. In the end, there were only a few people from the devil cult on Kunlun Mountain. Instead, it was your two perfected lords and several major factions that were fighting among themselves. I'm not going to join in the fun. Chapter 389. Perfected Lord Tianlan paused for a moment and suddenly looked a little embarrassed, but he soon recovered and said to Lu Chen with a smile, that was an accident. You know what an accident means, right? Originally, I asked you to go there to track down the spy in the Kunlun party, but then an opportunity suddenly appeared for me to reorganize the Kunlun party. Do you think I should do it or not? Lu Chen sneered and said, after saying so much, where is the spy of the devil cult? Have you found him or not? Not yet. Perfected Lord Tianlan answered honestly, indeed, I haven't found him yet. Actually, if you didn't cause so much trouble, such as directly rushing to the Su family to kill people, I still want you to continue to go back to Kunlun Mountain to help me find him. TSK, this time, Lu Chen didn't even bother to say anything and directly rolled his eyes at him. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed and said, let's forget about these things. It's all in the past after all. What's your plan now? The corner of Lu Chen's eye twitched and he said, just don't bother me. I'll find a place to eat and wait for my death. It's very comfortable. Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, that's too much of a pity. Others can't learn your skills at all. Lu Chen sneered and said, what's there to pity? This deadly skill, whoever wants it can take it. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed and looked at Lu Chen very gently, like a father looking at a naughty child. After a while, he said, don't be anxious, listen to me. Lu Chen shrugged and sat down on the ground indifferently. Although his expression was as usual, it was not that he didn't have those complicated emotions in his heart. In fact, sometimes, even he himself did not quite understand how he felt when facing this damned baldy who had raised him since he was young and taught him all of his skills. Respect, worship, resentment, anger, trust, or doubt. There seemed to be something in every kind of feeling. When he followed Old Ma to the Immortal City from Qingshitang village this time, before he really saw Tianlan, Lu Chen was actually a little nervous and perturbed. Because until today, he still couldn't see and understand this damn baldy clearly. Is he good or bad? Did he really believe her, or was he just using her with his flowery words? Lu Chen felt that these matters were shrouded in clouds and mist, and he couldn't see through them clearly. I really believe you. Perfected Lord Tianlan's calm voice came from the darkness ahead. There was no fluctuation of emotion, as if what he said was the most natural thing in the world. You know, in the past few decades, I founded the Fuyan Agency and gathered many talents to do the most important thing, which is to deal with the devil cult. But the demons of the devil cult are too cunning. After they can't beat us, they hide in the dark and play all kinds of tricks. Even now, a lot of them have infiltrated into Zhengxianmeng. It's very troublesome. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, I heard from Old Ma that even your subordinates in Fuyunji have caught a few devil cult spies. Perfected Lord Tianlan sneered and said, Isn't that so? Even the organization I specially set up to deal with the devil cult has been infiltrated by the demons of the devil cult. That's why I said that the idiots of Zhengxianmeng have cultivated too much that even their brains have been damaged. Nowadays, the devil cult only looks weak on the surface, but it is everywhere in the dark and has far-reaching influence. Maybe its real strength is far beyond our imagination. If we don't attack it, I'm afraid a big disaster is right in front of us. Lu Chen was silent. Tianlan glanced at him and said, I've said something similar to you before. Today, I might as well say it to you again. In dealing with the devil cult, I really only trust you. Because everyone in the world may be a spy of the devil cult, but only you are not. Come back and help me. Tianlan said slowly, word by word. Lu Chen sat in the dark, quiet and silent. At this time, it was already late at night and there was almost no light in the woods. Their figures had long been integrated into the surrounding darkness. He couldn't see Tianlan clearly and didn't know if Tianlan could really see him clearly. I still don't really want to do it. After a long time, Lu Chen broke the silence and said, I always have a feeling that I've been doing the same thing all my life, and it seems that this thing can never be finished. I'm a little annoyed. Tianlan nodded slightly in the dark. After a while, he said, Then what do you want to do? Lu Chen said, I've said it before. Find a place to eat and wait for death. Well, I've worked hard for you for more than 10 years. In exchange for the rest of my life, it's not too much, right? Tianlan seemed to be amused by his words. He chuckled and then sighed, saying, It's not too much, not too much. For some reason, the more they talked face to face like this, the calmer Lu Chen felt. Although he had not completely abandoned the suspicion he once had, it had gradually weakened a lot. This person he had watched grow up, the person he once saw as a father, this tall and burly figure, perhaps his position in his heart was even greater and more deep-rooted than he had imagined. Of course you can choose to hide and eat and wait for death. I won't force you, nor will I break my promise. Lord Tianlan said lightly in the dark, but I think you should also know that some things can't be done as you like. You're still young, and your cultivation and talent are not bad. In the future, you'll probably live longer than me. But once I die, or when the devil cult strength suddenly rises again, as long as they seize the place of Fuyunji, they can find a lot of things. At that time, it won't be difficult to find your hiding place. Lu Chen snorted coldly but didn't say anything. Tianlan looked at him and said, As long as the devil cult is not destroyed, even if you hide, you won't feel at ease. I'm telling the truth. Destroy, 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 you only know how to destroy the devil cult. Lu Chen suddenly became a little angry and said to Tianlan with a trace of anger, "It's been more than 10 or 20 years, and you still say the same thing. But how to destroy it? During the Battle of the Barren Valley, we've done so much, but the devil cult still hasn't been destroyed. After so many years, it's still like a ghost. You also said that there's a secret in Kunlun Mountain, but we've searched around and still found nothing. Then tell me, what should I do to completely get rid of this disgusting and ferocious devil cult?" Tianlan was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he smiled and said in a gentle voice, "Why, it seems that you're very annoyed by this matter." "Nonsense, I've been pestered by this matter for more than 10 or 20 years, and I've been worried about dying a violent death every day. Who wouldn't be annoyed?" Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, "You're right. Actually, I've thought about all of these before. Recently, I've suddenly realized something. We definitely have to destroy the devil cult. However, the direction that we've been taking in the past might not be right." Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "What do you mean?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "Previously, we always wanted to get rid of those important figures in the devil cult, thinking that we can destroy the devil cult by killing all of these ambitious demons. But the truth shows that this method is not effective. The demons of the devil cult are always like weeds, popping up in waves. But later, I suddenly thought of a key point that might be able to destroy the devil cult once and for all." Lu Chen's body trembled slightly. He looked up at Perfected Lord Tianlan and said after a while, "Is there really such a way?" "Yes." "What is it?" Tianlan smiled in the darkness. The darkness shrouded him, making his tall figure look like a devil in the darkness, terrifying and terrifying. "The divine tree." After saying that, Perfected Lord Tianlan became indifferent again and said, "That thing has been the source of the devil cult's belief for thousands of years. As long as we find a way to destroy it, the devil cult will naturally collapse, right?" Lu Chen suddenly fell into silence and did not say a word for a long time. Chapter 390. "What do you think?" Tianlan asked, probably seeing that Lu Chen did not speak for a long time. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "I thought the tree of God of the devil cult is the same as the gods in other myths and legends. They are all illusory things that do not exist in the world." Tianlan smiled and said, "In the legends of the devil cult, the real tree of God is a divine object that has existed since the beginning of the world. Not only is it indomitable, but it can also cross the heavens and the earth and give birth to all things. It is the origin of all living things in the world. You should have heard of these myths in the devil cult, right?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "Yes, this is the fundamental belief of the devil cult demons. Of course I know about it. However, in the devil cult, there is always a part that cannot be justified. That is, from the beginning to the end, from the birth of the devil cult until now, no one has really seen the appearance of the tree of God in this world. There are only extravagant myths that can only deceive those who have no brains." A glimmer of light flashed across Tianlan's eyes. He looked at Lu Chen and asked with a smile, "You don't believe it?" Lu Chen said, "I don't believe it." Lord Tianlan nodded and seemed to be quite satisfied with Lu Chen's attitude. He then said, "This thing is naturally insignificant to us, but for the demons of the devil cult, it is a very important matter. In addition, I heard that in the devil cult, there is the so-called branch, leaf, seed. Do you know about it?" Lu Chen's heart suddenly jumped, but he looked as usual. After thinking for a moment, he said, "It is probably the one branch, two leaves, one seed that they say. The people of the devil cult said that these four treasures are the remains of the tree of God left in this world. At the same time, there is another saying that as long as these four divine objects are gathered and the secret method passed down from the devil cult era is used to perform the summoning ceremony, the door of Void Realm can be opened and the tree of God will be summoned back to this world." Ridiculous. Perfected Lord Tianlan sneered with a disdainful look on his face, and said, "This statement sounds very far-fetched. Even if it's true, those idiots in the devil cult don't think about it. How can something that can break the void and enter this world through summoning be a deity that can bring them eternal life and power? I think it's more likely to be a catastrophe. Lu Chen smiled and did not say anything, but judging from his expression, he obviously had no objection to Lord Tianlan's words. After sneering, Lord Tianlan asked Lu Chen, "By the way, have you seen these 4 objects before?" Lu Chen sat upright on the ground, like a shadow blending into the surrounding darkness. His face could not be seen clearly. After a while, he said calmly, "I have never seen these 4 divine objects in the evil faction. Back then, I also asked Yun Shouyang about this, and he said that this myth and legend has been passed down for thousands of years, until now it is difficult to distinguish the truth from the lies. However, these 4 treasures do exist, but it seems that not all of them are in the hands of the evil faction demons. A few of them have already been lost in the world, until now there is no hope of finding them." "Yes." Lord Tianlan nodded and said, "What you said is similar to what I know. It is basically like this." Lu Chen raised his head slightly and looked at him. He said, "Then what do you plan to do now? And what do you mean by destroying the Tree of God?" Lord Tianlan said, "Actually, after I thought of this, I have already secretly made some arrangements. Of course, it is still early. Roughly speaking, we'll first find one or a few of the 4 divine objects, branch, leaf, and seed, and then we'll use these to find the others." Lu Chen suddenly raised his voice as if he was a little surprised. He interrupted and asked, "If you find one divine object, you can find other divine objects through it?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and touched his bald head with his hand. Then, he said, I do have some ideas. We can give it a try. You know, when one's cultivation realm reaches my level, he will always think of or understand some strange divine powers. It just so happens that I have a divine power that can divine the whereabouts of other things through the same species. Of course, this divine power is actually not so effective every time, especially for these things that are related to the legendary divine objects. The mysteries of heaven are even more mysterious and it is easy to make a mistake. But it is still a method after all. Lu Chen paused for a moment and said, "That's amazing. How confident are you?" Lord Tianlan laughed and said, "About 70% to 80%. Lu Chen's pupils suddenly constricted. Fortunately, he could not see clearly in the darkness. After a while, he said in a low voice, "This should be very confident." Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "That is why I want you to come and help me to see if you can find those branches, leaves and seeds." Just as Lu Chen was about to speak, perfected Lord Tianlan waved his hand slightly and stopped him. "I roughly know what you want to say. However, I still think that you're the most suitable person for this matter. After all, it's something that's closely related to the devil cult. No one is more familiar with the devil cult than you. How about helping me one more time?" He stared at Lu Chen and said, "Let's completely eliminate this evil scourge that has been harming the world for thousands of years, okay?" Lu Chen took a deep breath, and just when he was about to speak, he suddenly hesitated. He felt waves of coldness appear on his forehead and back, and he suddenly realized to his shock that he was actually drenched in sweat unknowingly, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly nodded heavily and said in a deep voice, "Okay, I will help you with this. I was right about you." Perfected Lord Tianlan walked to Lu Chen's side with a gratified expression and patted the latter's shoulder gently. "I knew that you wouldn't disappoint me." Perfected Lord Tianlan said in a joyful tone. Lu Chen snorted and said, "You won't make me work for nothing again this time, right?" Lord Tianlan was stunned for a moment and said, "When did I make you work for nothing?" "I don't think so." "That time on the Kunlun mountain," Lu Chen said indifferently, "you called me over and made a bunch of extravagant promises, but you have not fulfilled any of them until now." A trace of embarrassment flashed across Lord Tianlan's old face. Then, he smiled bitterly and said, I'm indeed in the wrong for this matter. I'm sorry, but you should also understand that there are things that I can't do either. Back then on the night of the full moon, you suddenly rushed to the Su family at the foot of the mountain and killed them. Then, you immediately escaped and attracted the attention of both the Orthodox and the demon sections. Under such circumstances, I was the new sect leader and needed to reorganize the major forces in the Kunlun party. I really couldn't stand up for you. Lu Chen waved his hand and said, I know. That's why I came back to see you this time. I'll help you with this matter again, but I also want to know how you'll arrange things for me if this matter is done well. At least, I'll have something to worry about. Lord Tianlan stared at Lu Chen for a long time and suddenly nodded. You're right. Actually, even if things don't go well for you this time, it's just bad luck and I won't blame you. What I want to tell you is that no matter what, I'll fulfill my promise after this matter is over. As he said that, he suddenly reached out and grabbed one of Lu Chen's palms before stuffing something into his palm. Based on the feeling of the skin on his palm, Lu Chen instinctively felt that it seemed to be a square metal plate. It was hard and a little cold, and its edges were smooth and round. However, the center of the plate was uneven and seemed to be engraved with a word. He rubbed it for a moment and suddenly frowned. Looking at Lord Tianlan, he asked in surprise, What's this? It's the word Tian. One day, you'll inherit this Daoist name from me. Right now, perfected Lord Tianlan's unusually tall and burly body seemed like a tall mountain in the darkness. Even his voice seemed to carry a trace of an ancient aura. Lu Chen, keep it well. This is something that I should have given to you more than 10 years ago. Chapter 391. Something that should have been given more than 10 years ago? What was the meaning of this so-called heavenly token? Everything seemed to be possible to guess, but perfected Lord Tianlan did not continue to explain to Lu Chen, and Lu Chen did not ask further. He just slowly clenched the token in his hand and did not say a word in the darkness. No one could see the expression on his face at the moment, so no one could guess his current mood. The night wind swept past the treetops, making rustling sounds and adding a bit of silence to the world. No one else knew the content of this conversation in the forest in the middle of the night, including old Ma who had been staying outside the small forest from the beginning to the end. He was a bit bored, but in fact, he was also a bit worried. He would look at the forest from time to time, but he never had the intention to go in. Until he saw Atsu walking out of the darkness in the forest in the night, and then Lu Chen's figure also appeared in his sight. Old Ma immediately went to greet them. When he was about to say something, he suddenly turned his head and looked to the side. Then, with a slightly surprised expression, he asked Lu Chen, Where is perfected Lord Tianlan? He went back first. Lu Chen said, He said that he has something to deal with and has to rush back, so he won't come to see you again. He asked me to tell you on his behalf. Oh. Old Ma nodded. He naturally did not dare to be dissatisfied with perfected Lord Tianlan. He said, His Excellency is very busy every day, so of course he is very busy. It doesn't matter. By the way, how did your conversation go? Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, It went well, but he asked me to stay here in Immortal City to help him. Old Ma immediately looked happy. He patted Lu Chen's shoulder and said with a smile, That's good. Immortal City is the most prosperous place in the world, and you have a perfected Lord of Soul Formation as your backer. If you stay here and work, your life will be too easy. He still wants me to help him deal with the devil cult, Lu Chen said. Old Ma paused for a moment, his brows slightly wrinkled. After a moment, he slowed down his speech, as if he was thinking, said, If that is the case, then it is hard to say, after all the evil faction side is full of lunatics, but, this seems to be what you have been doing all your life, at least you are much better than others. Lu Chen smiled bitterly and looked at old Ma helplessly. You also know that this is the only thing I've done in my life? Old Ma shrugged, and then he said, Have you thought it through? Let me know if you've made a decision. I'll return to the Immortal City to see the Lord first, and then I'll arrange everything. Lu Chen opened his mouth to say something, but he suddenly held back. He placed his hand on his chest and pressed lightly. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "All right, then go and ask them what they want us to do." All right. When the morning sun shone down from the horizon, Lu Chen was still lying on the ground in the forest, his head resting on the soft fur of Atsu. As the sun gradually rose, the light and shadow in the forest kept changing, shifting. There was a kind of strange and breathtaking beauty. Lu Chen woke up in the morning light, but did not get up. He only looked at the light and shadow crisscrossing, changing strange scene. Occasionally he would reach out and touch his chest. Under his clothes, there was already a tag hanging on his chest, and there was still a trace of faintly discernible cool air coming from it. He waited until noon before he saw old Ma return. Looking at his hurried footsteps, but his expression was considered normal. Lu Chen then slowly sat up, smiled at old Ma and said, "You've worked hard, how's the matter?" Old Ma sat down in front of him, and did not talk nonsense with Lu Chen. He said straightforwardly, "We don't need to fight and kill this time, the most important task is to find the evil sect's legendary branch, leaf and seed." Lu Chen nodded his head and said, "How do we find it? At least when I was in the evil sect, I didn't really see these divine objects. Now we have to rely on the two of us to look for it blindly." After a pause, Lu Chen said, "If that's really the case, I think the two of us should go back to Qingshideng village, at least it might be a little safer there." Old Ma laughed and said, "Don't worry, although it's very difficult to find these things, Perfected Immortal has already told me that the most important thing about these divine objects of the same origin is that they are intertwined with each other's fate energy. As long as one of them is found, someone will use other secret techniques to deduce the approximate location of the other divine objects." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and said, "There's actually such a powerful supernatural power? Who knows?" Old Ma smiled and said, "Anyway, it's all the supernatural power of perfected immortals, it's not strange that we mortals can't compare." Lu Chen pondered for a moment and said, "Even so, the world is so big, it's really too difficult to find the four treasures that have no clues at all." Before he finished speaking, Old Ma interrupted, "Don't be afraid, Perfected Immortal has already told me very clearly this morning. Now in this immortal city, including the land within 100 miles, there's a hidden divine object. We just need to think of a way to find it." Lu Chen's expression changed and instantly became a little serious. He looked at Old Ma and said, "Where did this news come from?" Old Ma shook his head and said, "I also heard it from Perfected Immortal. Of course I don't know the specific source of the news, and it's not convenient for me to ask." Old Ma was telling the truth. Chapter 392. Lu Chen and Old Ma looked at each other, then turned to look together. At noon, when the sun shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves, a slender and beautiful figure walked in from outside the forest. It was a beautiful and mature woman. She had a smile on her face, charming and gentle. She even waved at Lu Chen, then said with a smile, "Lord True Monarch, firstly, he has too many things to deal with every day. Most of the time, he is really too busy. Secondly, he has too big of a target. Even though his Tao is profound and powerful, he really attracts too much attention. If it was somewhere else, it would be fine. But in this immortal city with countless hidden dragons and crouching tigers, it is very easy to attract the attention of other forces." She smiled and said to Lu Chen and Old Ma, "You guys don't want this to happen, do you?" Lu Chen stared at this woman, his brows slightly furrowed. After a moment, he said in a deep voice, "Shuang? Hall Leader Shui? That's me." The woman nodded with a smile and said, "I am Shuang, the hall leader of the Fuyunji you guys were in before. You can say that I am temporarily helping Lord True Monarch to look after you." Lu Chen's expression became more serious. No matter who it was, as long as they were below the level of divine monarch, when facing this woman, whether they were friend or foe, almost all of them would involuntarily feel a kind of reverence mixed with complex emotions. Fuyunji was an organization founded by Lord Tianlong many years ago. It was affiliated with Zhengxianmeng. Influenced by the founder, for many years, Fuyunji had always been one of the most fierce organizations in the righteous path against the devil sect. Every year, both sides had to pay a high price for this kind of hatred. And Shuang had also become one of the few enemies of the devil sect who had a blood feud with Lord Tianlong. For the past few years, the true Immortal Alliance had been growing stronger day by day, the evil sect had been weakening, and there was almost no stronger external enemy. The world had been peaceful for a long time, for a very long time, there had not been any overly intense and bloody battle. However, even under such circumstances, Shuang still became the hall master of the true Immortal Alliance whose hands were stained with the most blood and lives. It could be said that she was the most eye-catching. In recent years, the devil cult had been on the wane. Although there were often news of devil cult followers in other parts of the divine land, but looking at the overall situation, the once powerful devil cult began to go downhill after the crucial battle of the Desolate Valley in the Land of Chaos more than 10 years ago. Lu Chen's original identity was actually a shadow in Fuyunji. But he was a rather special existence. After lurking in the devil's sect for so many years, there was only one person in the outside world who could directly contact him, and that was Old Ma. And on the surface, Old Ma was just an ordinary member of Fuyunji, but in private, he would directly report to Lord Tianlong about the matter of Lu Chen. And because of this, in the past, Lu Chen did not fawn over this beautiful hall leader like most of the Fuyunji shadows, and Shuang did not seem to understand them. But this situation seemed to have changed today. In the future, if you are in the Immortal City, you can temporarily be considered as one of my subordinates. If there is anything, I will help you ask Lord Tianlong. What do you think? Shuang said very politely, as if they were old friends for many years, discussing with Lu Chen and Old Ma. Lu Chen smiled, nodded and said, "Okay." Shuang laughed, clapped her hands and said, "Then it's settled. You and Old Ma can find a place to rest for the next 2 days, then I will arrange for you to find a business in the Immortal City as a cover. Things can be carried out slowly, there is no hurry." Speaking up to here, she paused, then smiled and said, "In addition, there is one more thing I want to tell you. Lord Tianlong has already discussed this matter in depth with me, and I know the whole thing from the beginning to the end. Because there are too many mountains in this Immortal City, there are many eyes spying on us both in the open and in the dark, so it is indeed not very convenient for Lord Tianlong. So in the future, the two of you better not look for him directly. If there is anything, tell me, okay?" Old Ma frowned slightly and turned to look at Lu Chen, only to find that the other was also looking at him. The two of them looked at each other in the air for a moment, then turned away. After a while, Old Ma laughed and cupped his hands to Shuang. "Hallmaster Shui is right. Then in the future, we brothers will have to ask Hallmaster to take care of us. You are too polite." Shui Ying's attitude had always been very gentle and polite, but for some reason, there seemed to be an indistinct sense of distance between them. Moreover, when facing the two of them, she seemed to treat them differently. Intentionally or unintentionally, she placed more of her attention on the quiet Lu Chen. It was also at this time that Lu Chen opened his mouth and said to Shuang, "Hallmaster Shui, there is something that I need your help with." Shuang nodded and said, "Go ahead." Lu Chen pointed at Atsu lying on the side and said, "This dog has been with me for many years. Can it follow me into the city?" Shuang glanced at the huge figure of Atsu and was obviously startled. Her beautiful eyebrows furrowed and then said, "This might be a bit troublesome. Recently, in the city. You should know about the dog prohibition order, right?" As she spoke, she raised her head and looked at Lu Chen and Old Ma. Lu Chen and Old Ma both nodded. Lu Chen then said, "I know about that. Old Ma also told me before to let it loose in the mountains around the Immortal City for a period of time. However, this is the Immortal City, not an ordinary place. There are countless experts in the open and in the dark. I am not at ease. Xueying was obviously still a bit hesitant. After pondering for a moment, she said, "This black dog is too big of a target. It is too eye-catching. If you keep it by your side and one day it runs out onto the street, I am afraid that in the blink of an eye, you will be in danger of being exposed." Lu Chen interrupted, "Then if we only stay in our residence and don't go out, is that okay?" Xueying thought for a moment and said, "That should be much better. However, the two of you used to be in this line of work. If there is a mistake, the two of you should know what the consequences will be, right?" Lu Chen smiled and did not say anything else. Instead, he lowered his body and stroked Atsu's head. Old Ma did not say a word. Xueying glanced at the two of them and did not say anything else. After chatting with them for a while about future arrangements, she said goodbye and left. However, before she left, she secretly gave Old Ma a look. Old Ma coughed and said to Lu Chen with a smile, "You sit here for a while, I will send Hallmaster Xue off." After saying that, he followed Xueying out of the forest. Once they were out of the forest, they immediately felt that their vision was much brighter and their mood was much more cheerful. However, there was not much joy or excitement on Xueying's face. At the edge of the forest, she turned to look at Old Ma. Old Ma laughed bitterly in embarrassment. Xueying coldly snorted and said, "Old Ma, you are also an old man in Fuyunji. I do not need to lecture you on whether this matter is right or wrong, do I?" Old Ma nodded repeatedly and said, "Hallmaster, please calm down. You are indeed in the wrong in this matter. What you said is reasonable." Xueying said, "Then why did he insist on bringing that dog along? Logically speaking, this person has been a shadow for more than 10 years. It is impossible for him not to know the rules here. Or is this Lu Chen taking advantage of the Lord True Monarch's high regard for him to purposely give me a hard time?" Old Ma immediately shook his head and said, "There is absolutely no such thing. Hallmaster, please do not overthink it." Xueying's expression fluctuated. She seemed to be a little cold, but she did not seem to be angry. After a while, she suddenly smiled and said, "Forget it. No matter what, we are all working for the Lord True Monarch. Let us keep in touch in the future." After saying that, she nodded to Old Ma and floated away. Old Ma looked at the graceful and beautiful figure and thought of the bloody legends that had tainted this woman in the past. He then looked back at the forest and could not help but smile bitterly and shake his head. He said in a low voice, "They are all troublesome." Chapter 393. This is troublesome. Old Ma looked a little worried and said to Lu Chen, "This is a little troublesome." Lu Chen sat on the ground, one hand casually stroking Atsu's head. Atsu also rested its head on Lu Chen's thigh with a satisfied expression. Its two giant eyes were also half closed, and it occasionally grunted twice, as if it was about to fall asleep. Hearing Old Ma's complaint, Lu Chen looked up at him and smiled, "What's wrong?" Old Ma squatted down beside him, glanced at the huge black dog, and said, "You know what's going on, so I don't have to talk nonsense. We'd better keep a low profile when we enter the Immortal City, but if you insist on bringing Atsu, it's really troublesome." Roar. Suddenly, there was a low roar, and it was aggressive, as if a ferocious demon beast had suddenly jumped out of the forest, which startled Old Ma. But when he took a closer look, there was no movement around him. The one who roared was Atsu, who looked simple and silly just now. This giant dog, which was already taller than an adult man, stared at Old Ma with a fierce look in its eyes. It let out a low growl from its throat, but it looked like it was about to bite Old Ma. The snow-white fangs and the fierce look in Atsu's eyes made Old Ma's heart skip a beat, and he subconsciously took a step back. But at this moment, Lu Chen reached out from the side, and with a smile, he slapped Atsu's head, and scolded with a smile, "Don't mess around, old Ma is one of us." Atu retracted the fangs that he had just bared just a moment ago. He glared at old Ma and looked a little unwilling, but he still lay down next to Lu Chen while huffing and puffing. Old Ma heaved a sigh of relief and couldn't help cursing again, "Damn it. I gave you so many meat bones to eat back then, and now you've forgotten all about it." Lu Chen waved his hand and said to old Ma, "This matter may be a little troublesome, but please take the trouble. The mountains around the Immortal City are not safe. I don't feel at ease leaving Atsu alone outside." Old Ma pondered for a moment and said to Lu Chen, "Actually, it's not difficult for us to bring Atsu into the city and find a bigger house to stay in. I'm just afraid that after a long time, Atsu will be so bored that they can't take it anymore and run out to the streets. That would be troublesome." Lu Chen thought for a moment, and suddenly asked old Ma, "This time, we won't have to pay for the expenses ourselves, right?" Old Ma immediately said, "Of course, no matter what, we are still working for Fuyunji. At least they have to pay for our daily expenses. Well, I still have to talk to hall leader Shui later to see if she can give me more money to open a shop, a storefront, or something. This is our business without any capital." At the end of his speech, old Ma rubbed his hands excitedly. It seemed that he still cared about doing business and opening a shop. Even if he had failed repeatedly on the road of business in the past 10 years and suffered countless losses, he still had a lot of money. As someone who had experienced that period of time with old Ma, Lu Chen was very clear about old Ma's experience and ability in this regard. But since it was not his own money, Lu Chen did not care about it. He just said to old Ma seriously, "That's good. When you go to ask for money, ask for an extra, a large portion of rations for Atsu." Old Ma was startled and said, "A large portion of rations? What is this for?" Lu Chen touched the smooth fur on Atsu's back and patted its belly. He smiled and said, "This dog is different from ordinary dogs. Believe me, as long as there is enough delicious food, I guarantee that it will be too lazy to take a step out." Old Ma looked at Atsu with some astonishment. He could not help but roll his eyes and said, "Is there such a thing? I say, are you a dog or a pig?" 2 days later, an extremely spacious carriage that could seat 4 to 5 people silently stopped outside the forest. The coachman was a dark, skinny, and capable-looking old man around 50 years of age. He didn't make a sound when he arrived and just parked the carriage without saying a word. Then, he sat in the carriage and waited silently. After a while, old Ma, Lu Chen, and Atsu walked out of the forest and got on the carriage. From the beginning to the end, the old coachman looked straight ahead and did not look at them. It seemed that he was completely unaware of what was happening behind him. It was not until the sound of old Ma closing the carriage door was heard that he seemed to suddenly wake up. He also did not look back, but picked up the whip in his hand. With a crack of the whip, the sound of horse hooves could be heard. The carriage turned around and began to walk towards the Immortal City in the distance. The carriage was very spacious, and the inside was also clean and tidy. Once the door was closed, it was as if it was isolated from the outside world. There were small windows on both sides of the carriage, but at the same time, there was a curtain so that the people inside the carriage could see the scenery outside, but the people outside the carriage could not see the situation inside the carriage clearly. It was very convenient. After entering the carriage, perhaps because Lu Chen had already told them beforehand, Atsu obediently lay on the wooden plank, while Lu Chen and old Ma sat opposite each other. The carriage was spacious enough, and they sat comfortably. They heard the sound of the wheels rolling along the way. They gradually moved from the quiet mountains to the road, and as they gradually approached the huge and bustling Immortal City, more and more people came and went around the carriage, and there were all kinds of sounds. Listening to the various sounds that came from outside the carriage, Lu Chen suddenly said, "Where are we going?" Old Ma said, "Hall leader Shui has already made arrangements. Through secret means, he found a spacious house for us. It will not attract attention. We will go and stay there first, and then we will move slowly. Lu Chen nodded and said, after all, this immortal city is Xianxianmeng's territory. It is convenient to do things, and the speed is much faster than other places. Old Ma glanced at him, but shook his head and said, you are wrong about this. Lu Chen was a little surprised and said, what do you mean? Old Ma looked out of the window through the curtain and said, you rarely come here. Even if you come occasionally, because your identity is hidden, you will not come into contact with the people here in Xianxianmeng, so you do not understand the current situation. Now in this immortal city, Xianxianmeng, there are scenes of overcrowding everywhere. There are all kinds of big and small yamen in the immortal city, and there are countless redundant officials. To do a simple thing, they have to worship a lot of bodhisattvas, make people break their legs, and then accept bribes and money to do things. It is a common practice. Speaking of this, Old Ma smiled thoughtfully and said, normally speaking, if we want to buy such a house through ordinary means, and we don't give them money, and we just do things according to the proper rules, let alone 2 days, it will take at least 2 months. Lu Chen frowned and said after a moment of silence, according to what you said, what if I go to do something and say that it was the damn Baldy who gave me the task? Will those people speed up? Old Ma hesitated and seemed to be thinking for a moment. Then he said, with the reputation of a perfected immortal, maybe it can be done faster by 10 days. Lu Chen couldn't help but laugh and said, the damn Baldy's reputation can only be faster by 10 days? Old Ma also laughed and said, more or less. These things are too small and too complicated, but there are rules to follow. You, a perfected immortal, can't be too serious with your subordinates. It's embarrassing enough, so it's more or less like this. Lu Chen sighed and said, then why can it be so fast this time? It seems that Hall leader Shui seems to be different from others? Yes, in the Immortal Alliance, Fuyunji is sometimes like an anomaly. He does things quickly, and his level of command is far better than the other halls. But because of this, our hall leader Shuang has also been criticized a lot. People say that she likes to be in the limelight, is arrogant, and flatters perfected immortals and so on. However, this is what I think about this matter. He raised his head to look at Lu Chen and said indifferently, a person whose hands are stained with blood will always move faster than those mediocre people, right? Lu Chen nodded and said, you are right. Chapter 394. There were no city walls in the immortal city. Other than the majestic celestial dragon mountain standing tall on the north side, the east, west, and south sides were all flat plains. A few large rivers flowed through the plains, and the fertile land was filled with undulating buildings and pavilions. The bustling place could be said to be unparalleled in the world. This was the largest city in the vast land of the Divine Prefecture, and also the city with the largest population in history. Hundreds of millions of creatures gathered here, and the countless joys and sorrows of the human world played out. Perhaps it was because this place was too prosperous and flourishing that there was no city wall in the world that could encircle it. It was like the legendary divine tree that had existed since the beginning of the world, growing uncontrollably and wildly. There were ancient ruins in the immortal city, and the scale of these ruins was extremely large. There were many traces of ruins on the surface, and the scale of the ruins underground was even larger. There were countless secrets hidden inside, and perhaps there were countless treasures. Of course, there could also be countless dangers and monsters. For so many years, the legend about this ancient ruins had long been deeply rooted in people's hearts, and there were countless versions of it. However, at this time, the rumors were ultimately just gossip, because the big shots of Xianxianmeng had cast a spell to seal this ancient ruins many years ago. When the carriage entered the streets of the immortal city and steadily moved forward, through the curtains on the carriage, Lu Chen's gaze passed over the houses of different heights on both sides of the street, and saw a very tall but obviously broken statue in the distance. It had huge fangs and a mighty aura. Standing on top of the city, it seemed to overlook all living things, and it had its own domineering aura, like a giant beast pouncing on one's face. Lu Chen stared in that direction from afar in the carriage. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. He felt that the already broken eye of the giant beast on the statue seemed to have suddenly come to life at a certain moment, and looked into the carriage. It was like a shocking roar in the dark, suddenly exploding in one's mind, causing one's body to suddenly turn cold. But very quickly, that feeling receded like the tide, and there was no more sound, as if it was a dream. Lu Chen's gaze did not leave the statue. After looking at it in silence for a while, he suddenly asked Old Ma, "Is that a white tiger?" Old Ma looked back at the window, then nodded and said, "Well, yes. The place we're going to this time is in the White Tiger district. That mythological beast statue is too tall. No matter how far it is, as long as you are here, you can probably see it if you raise your head. I guess it's the same in our residence." Lu Chen glanced at Old Ma, and a glimmer of light flashed in the depths of his eyes. "How did you feel when you looked at the white tiger statue?" Old Ma was startled for a moment. Then, he shrugged and smilingly said, "What can I feel? It's nothing more than a sigh. This statue, together with the other 3 giant statues of mythological beasts in the Immortal City, is said to be originally from this relic. It's just that after so many years, no one can figure out its origin." Lu Chen nodded, his gaze slightly drooping. His expression seemed to have some subtle changes, but very quickly returned to normal. He nodded and said, "Indeed, the person who could create such a giant statue must also be an incomparably powerful race." Old Ma chuckled and said, "Most likely. But who knows, no matter how powerful they are, there are no traces of them now. Perhaps they have encountered some natural or man-made disaster, and have already perished." The sound of the carriage carried them away, leaving only the giant white tiger statue that stood majestically under the sunlight. It still stood there motionlessly, as if it was still waiting for something in the quiet years. Their new residence in the Immortal City was still very good. It was on the side of a gentle tributary of the Mirror River, one of the 4 major rivers. This was the depths of the White Tiger district, and the surroundings had long been filled with houses. The carriage first crossed a stone bridge called Horse Washing Bridge, and then went down to a fork in the road. There was a street with 2 opposite alleys. The alley on the left was called Stone Flower Alley. This name sounded a little strange, and no one knew when it was given this name, but it was clearly written as such on the road sign. Entering Stone Flower Alley, there was a row of houses of various sizes. Most of them looked like large mansions with clear facades. There were about 11 or 12 families. The carriage took them all the way to the deepest part of the alley, and stopped at the door. The old and lean coachman got off the carriage, went forward to open the door, and directly drove the carriage in. When the door closed, Lu Chen, Old Ma, and Black Dog jumped down from the carriage, and after that, their new home was revealed in front of them. It looked like an ordinary house with 2 entrances. On the outside, there was a living room, a few small rooms, and it looked like an ordinary family's kitchen, storeroom, and the like. On the inside, there were 2 rooms in the east and west, and a courtyard in the middle, surrounded by a veranda, just enough for one person to have 1 bedroom. The whole house was clean and tidy, and very quiet. It looked like a good place to live. Obviously, when Shuang from Fuyunji arranged this matter, she had put in a lot of thought. After bringing them here, the old coachman quickly took his leave, and it looked like he was not willing to stay for a long time. It seemed that these 2 people were scourges in his eyes, and if they stayed too long, they might get into trouble. The courtyard was not very big, but it was enough for Atsu to stroll around for a while. Lu Chen did not care that Atsu was curiously sniffing and running around the house, and turned to Old Ma and said, "Are we going to stay here?" "Yes, what do you think?" Old Ma replied. Lu Chen said, "It's okay, anyway, we don't really care about this." "Oh right, where are the other things?" Old Ma said, "They said that they have everything arranged." They should be placed somewhere in this house. Oh, Lu Chen said, looking for it. The two of them walked together. They first went to look at the bedroom, and after they were satisfied, they walked through the entire house. Finally, they found the neatly piled goods in a storeroom in front of them. There were so many of them that they looked like a small mountain, and they were about to fill the storeroom to the brim. Other than some daily necessities, most of the things here were food, and they were all neatly stacked. Then, they quickly realized that there was a large amount of valuable demon beast flesh. Obviously, the people in Fuyunji had found out about what Lu Chen said previously. Standing at the door of the storeroom and looking at the small mountain, that was much taller than their heads, Lu Chen and Old Ma looked at each other and were speechless for a while. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly said, "Look at this, and think about the 10 years that we lived in Qingshutang village, those hard times. Damn, isn't the difference in our lives too big?" Old Ma looked like he was gritting his teeth, and he said bitterly, "Fuyunji is actually so rich here. Damn. I suffered for 10 years for nothing." Lu Chen clicked his tongue and looked at Old Ma with a faint smile. Then, he patted his shoulder and turned around. Old Ma was still depressed, and he glared at the full storeroom angrily. Suddenly, he slammed the door shut, and followed behind Lu Chen. At the same time, he scolded, "Corruption." Chapter 395. What was a house? It was just a piece of land surrounded by 4 walls. A few rooms were built, and a few beds were placed. One could sleep peacefully and shelter them from the wind and rain. Immortal City was the most prosperous place in the world. However, when Lu Chen and Old Ma stayed in their current house, the wall seemed to isolate them from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. The two of them chose their own bedrooms. Lu Chen then went to the storeroom and took out a large piece of meat from an unknown demonic beast and threw it to Atu. As expected, this fellow ran to the courtyard with the piece of meat in his mouth and lay down on the grass by the side of the wall. Then, he began to enjoy the delicious meal by himself with a satisfied expression. When Lu Chen and Old Ma finished tidying up their rooms and settled their luggage, it was already dusk when they returned to the courtyard. They sat at the original stone table and stone bench in the courtyard. Old Ma took out a tea set as if he was performing a magic trick. The kitchen in front of them was boiling hot water, so they made tea together. Lu Chen was a little surprised. He smiled and said, "You actually carry these things with you. I remember that you used to like to drink with me, right?" Old Ma nodded and poured him a full cup of tea. He said, "It's just a habit that I've developed in the past few years. I'm old now, so I don't like to drink much." Lu Chen's hand that was holding the teacup paused in midair. Then he put it to his mouth and took a sip as if nothing had happened. He smiled and said, "How old are you? You have the nerve to say that you're old?" He smacked his lips as if he was savoring the aftertaste. After a moment, he said, "This tea is not bad." Old Ma smiled, then sighed and said, "How can we not be old? We've been in this business for more than 10 or 20 years. The two of us can actually be considered to have lived a long life." Lu Chen thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "Yes, I think so." Old Ma clicked his tongue and narrowed his eyes as if he was recalling something from the past. He said, "I remember when I first entered the industry, people told me that if I did well, I would have power and wealth, and that it would be a shortcut to heaven. But no one told me that most people in this industry would have short lives." "Huh, wasn't it the damned Baldy who pulled you into the business?" Lu Chen asked with a smile. Seeing Old Ma shaking his head, Lu Chen seemed to have recalled something. He smiled and said, "Of course I was dragged into this by that damn Baldy. Back then, he didn't talk to me about power and wealth. From the beginning to the end, he only talked to me about justice and the heavenly Tao." Old Ma couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. Lu Chen smiled and said, "It's funny, isn't it? But you don't say, I really believed him at that time." And if I didn't have this belief, maybe I wouldn't have been able to come back alive from the devil cult. Old Ma smiled and looked at Lu Chen with a gentle and secret pity. He picked up the teapot and poured a cup of tea for him. Lu Chen tapped his fingers on the stone table and looked up at the dusk scenery in the sky. He was lost in thought and didn't speak for a while. After a while, he suddenly heard Old Ma ask, "Then when did you stop believing in these things?" Lu Chen rolled his eyes, squinted at him, pointed at him and said with a smile, "It was when I lived with you for 10 years. Old Ma quickly spat and said, "Don't talk nonsense, it has nothing to do with me. You don't dare to go out and say this. If it reaches Zhenjuan's ears, he will definitely kill me." Lu Chen laughed. Old Ma shook his head and sighed, "I'm old, I really don't want to do it anymore. What about you? I remember you told me before that you don't seem to have the energy. Why did you come all the way here to meet Zhenjuan and then decide to do it again?" Lu Chen raised his head and finished the tea in his cup, as if he had just gulped down a bowl of strong liquor. Then, he let out a light breath and said with a smile, "That damned Baldy begged me, but I couldn't put aside my pride. Well, maybe I still believe a little of what you just said about the justice of the common people. It would be strange if I believed you." Old Ma scolded with a smile. Night came and everyone went back to their rooms. After the door was closed, there was only silence and darkness. Atsu's body was now too big, it could no longer stay in bed with Lu Chen like before, so it was naturally chased to the ground. Fortunately, this big black dog had the bloodline of the celestial wolf and was now a holy beast, so it was completely unafraid of the cold on the ground. In addition, it had eaten a large piece of demon beast meat today, so it was full of energy. So soon, Lu Chen heard the sound of snoring coming from Atsu. It seemed that it had fallen asleep. But Lu Chen couldn't sleep. He lay on the bed, opened his eyes, and quietly looked at the darkness. Until dawn. The next morning, Old Ma knocked on the door and said to Lu Chen, "I'm going to find Shuang today, do you want to come?" At this time, Lu Chen had just gotten up, and the lazy dog Atsu was still lying on the ground, snoring. No one knew how long it would sleep for. Lu Chen called Old Ma to the courtyard and asked, "What's so urgent? We just moved in yesterday, and you're going to find her today?" "I'm going to ask her for money," Old Ma said confidently. Lu Chen was startled and said, "What money? Didn't she already help us settle down here? The food and necessities are also enough." Old Ma sneered and said, "This time, we are people who are going to do big things. How can we not have money and spirit stones? Besides, do you think she's so kind as to arrange so many things for us for no reason?" Lu Chen suddenly became a little curious and asked with a smile, "What do you mean?" Old Ma pointed to the north. From afar, the majestic and tall Mount Tianlong stood majestically like a giant guarding this huge city. And at the foot of Mount Tianlong was where the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng was located. That's because after I went to report your arrival to the Immortal, he personally promised that we would be satisfied this time. As long as we work hard, we will be treated well. Lu Chen's eyes lit up and he clapped his hands and laughed, "I see. Looks like we can get more than just this, of course." Old Ma rolled his eyes and said, "Just wait and see. If we don't say it, Shuang definitely won't give us money. This time, I'm going to get at least 1 or 2,000 spirit stones to spend first." Lu Chen interrupted him and said, "Are you stupid? You only want 1 or 2,000 spirit stones from a divine transformation immortal? Add 10 times that." Old Ma sucked in a breath of cold air and widened his eyes. "Isn't it too much to ask for so much? If I anger Shuang, she might kick me out on the spot." Lu Chen sneered, "This money doesn't belong to her. Needless to say, it must be from Zhengxianmeng. If we don't want it, we'll naturally spend it elsewhere. Plus, don't you want to have tens of thousands of spirit stones in your hands and walk around the immortal city with us?" Old Ma's expression changed. After a moment, he clapped his hands and said fiercely, "You're right. How can we do things without money? That kind of big thing can only be done with a lot of money. Lu Chen nodded repeatedly and said, "You've finally understood. Congratulations." Old Ma chuckled and turned to walk out. But after a few steps, he suddenly looked back at Lu Chen and said, "Hey, Lu Chen." Old Ma said, "When you were chatting with me yesterday, you said something about justice for all the people in the world, and so on. Maybe you still believe it in your heart?" Lu Chen frowned and said, "Yes, I did." "Why?" Old Ma said sternly, "Forget about these things. Trust me, you don't believe in these things anymore. Get lost." Chapter 396. After Old Ma went out, the house suddenly became much quieter. Lu Chen returned to the courtyard and sat down. He glanced at his bedroom. Through the open door, he could see that Atsu, the big lazy dog, was still lying on the ground, snoring loudly. It seemed that the demon beast meat that Shuang asked people to prepare yesterday was of high quality. Only after eating this kind of high-quality demon beast meat that was full of spiritual power would Atsu become so sleepy. In fact, it was because its body had absorbed too much spiritual power and needed more time to digest it. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched slightly and he shook his head. It made him feel a little helpless. For demon beasts like Atsu, which had the incomparably powerful celestial wolf bloodline, as long as it had enough good food, it could often increase its strength just by sleeping. As for the human race, who were now known as the rulers of the divine continent, if they wanted to obtain stronger power, they had to cultivate, and cultivate for their entire lives. Even the powerful divine transformation stage true monarchs were the same. Every cultivator would almost never stop cultivating throughout their lives. Cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. If one did not advance, one would fall back. Was this another way of saying that humans were inferior to dogs? Well, at least this dog was stupid. As Lu Chen thought of this, he felt a little better. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. After that, he stood up and carefully looked around before walking back to his bedroom and closing the door behind him. After the door was closed, the light in the room became a little darker. However, Atsu, who was sleeping on the ground, didn't notice this. Of course, it could have been aware of this, but with Lu Chen by its side, it was enough to let it relax and sleep peacefully. Lu Chen locked the door, then returned to the side of the bed and lay down. His face was calm as he regulated his breathing. After a while, he put his hand on his chest and closed his eyes. With a hum sound, a white light lit up. At that moment, the light in the space above the bed seemed to distort rapidly. After a moment, Lu Chen's body disappeared. Only a seed quietly fell from the air and gently landed on the soft bedding without making a sound. In the ancient and mysterious tree hole, the same white light flashed, and then Lu Chen's body appeared in the hole. Because he had been here too many times and was too familiar with this place, Lu Chen almost subconsciously adjusted his body in mid-air. He used his hand to lightly press the ground, and his whole body nimbly stood up. The gray and misty floating tree walls, the quiet and clear puddles, and some of the things he had piled up in the corner looked the same as before. Nothing had changed. Of course, there was also a sense of quietness, or perhaps, loneliness. Lu Chen looked around and walked to the water hole in the center of the tree hole. He squatted down and looked into the water. Many years ago, this puddle of water used to be a dark green color filled with dense vitality. Now, it had reduced to transparent and colorless ripples. There used to be nothing in the water, but now there were two things. One was a strange black fire that was still burning in the water, and the other was an aquatic spirit plant. It was the black mud lotus that Atsu stole in Kunlun Mountain. Lu Chen hadn't paid attention to the movement here for a while. Today, after coming over to take a closer look, he suddenly frowned slightly. He found something unusual. The cluster of black fire was similar to before. There wasn't much change, but the black mud lotus that was originally placed in the water to preserve the quality of its spiritual power seemed to have changed significantly. At some point, one end of the black mud lotus had already pierced into the soil at the bottom of the puddle, while the other end was slightly raised. Looking at the tiny roots that had begun to grow out of the lotus, this aquatic spirit plant seemed to have settled down in the puddle and had begun to germinate again. This made Lu Chen a little surprised. When that stupid dog Atsu stole this spirit plant, he didn't think about preserving it. He dug it out directly and crudely, directly biting off all the original roots. He didn't expect that the black mud lotus could be reborn here. It seemed to be a spirit plant with a very tenacious vitality. But soon, Lu Chen found that there seemed to be something wrong with this black mud lotus. It seemed to be a bit too black. As the name suggested, the black mud lotus grew in the mud, and most of the spirit plants were black in color. This was indeed the case, but in Lu Chen's eyes, the black color had changed a lot compared to the original color. The black color on the body of the black mud lotus was deep and translucent. It was far from the grade of an ordinary spirit plant. It could even be said that the black mud lotus looked like a piece of flawless black jade, with a bit of crystal clarity. This kind of color and light was not ordinary at first glance. But what made Lu Chen's expression more serious was that through the surface of the bright and translucent black, he could faintly feel a familiar aura that quietly resonated with a certain dark power in his body. The power of the black fire? Lu Chen raised his head and looked around the tree hole, then looked at the black fire in the water. For a moment, he couldn't tell if the black fire had infected the black mud lotus, or if the tree hole itself had some kind of mysterious power that he didn't know. He silently pondered for a long time. In the end, he didn't touch the obviously mutated spirit plant, and stood up. He walked to the edge of the tree hole, stretched out a hand, and gently stroked the tree wall. He slowly walked forward. The ancient and rough tree wall left a faint response in his palm, but his eyes were looking forward. Seed, branch? In the silence, he said to himself, if this is really a part of the tree of God, then it's probably only 2 leaves away from the evil sect's legendary miracle? There was only silence in the tree hole, and only his voice echoed. Lu Chen raised his head and found that he had already walked to the bottom of the 2 hidden doors on the tree wall. He stared at the door for a long time, and suddenly said, the legendary tree of God has a spirit. If you were its seed, what would you think? Would you want that leaf to come back here? The tree hole was still silent. The green gas on the tree wall slowly floated and drifted, as if a little uneasy, but also as if there was nothing unusual. Lu Chen shook his head, turned and walked towards the waterhole, ready to leave. But just as he stepped on the edge of the puddle, the pupils in his eyes suddenly shrank. He abruptly stopped and looked forward. He saw that in this ancient tree hole, the originally slow and misty green gas on the tree wall suddenly floated rapidly, and then rushed from all directions in one direction. That direction was right behind him. Lu Chen's body trembled, and after a moment, he suddenly turned around. At this moment, a strange buzzing sound suddenly rang out in the originally quiet tree hole. It sounded like the sound of the wind, but it also sounded like the whistling of the wind. In this strange sound, all the green gas on the tree walls rushed towards one direction, and it was impressively one of the 2 strange doors. On that strange door, the green gas gathered together, rolling and twisting incessantly, changing into all kinds of indescribable forms. Until the last moment, all of the green gas gradually slowed down, condensed into a pattern, reflected in the air in front of Lu Chen's eyes. Lu Chen's face suddenly turned a little strange, a little pale. Perhaps he had suddenly discovered the secret of this tree hole that had never appeared before, or perhaps he had thought of something even further away. He stood in the tree hole for a while, then slowly nodded his head and turned around without saying a word. Who? A faint white light flashed, this person disappeared in this ancient tree hole. After a moment, the green gas slowly dispersed, reintegrated, adhered to the tree wall, scattered and drifted to every corner, and once again became the same as before. It was as if nothing had happened. You're tuning into the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.